So, ladies and gentlemen, in the name of the Interfaith Forum of Iceland, I would like to welcome all of you to this conference on the circumcision of boys. We are here in Reykjavik, and in Reykjavik is this issue quite debated recently, since in the parliament there's a proposal of a bill to ban circumcision of boys. And for that reason that we have in the Interfaith Forum, we have concern about it. The Interfaith Forum has 18 members, 18 different religious organizations. We don't have any unanimity on this issue, but we have unanimity on that it is important to listen to what religious organizations have to say, and especially the religious organization very concerned by this issue, and that among them are the Jewish communities and the Muslim communities. I would like to welcome especially our guests from abroad. We have many very distinguished guests. But first of all, I welcome Dr. Ólafur Thor Gunnarsson from the Parliament of Iceland. And Dr. Ólafur Thor Gunnarsson is one of the sponsors of the bill, and he will explain to us the background of this bill and what is meant with this bill. I welcome also Salvor Nordal, who is the Ombudsman for Children here in Iceland. And there's a statement, I think she will present us the statement also from all the ombudsmen for children from all the Nordic countries. I welcome Rabbi Moshe Levine, who is the Vice President of the European Conference of Rabbis. Mr. Jaron Nadbornik, he's President of the Council of Jewish Congregations in Finland, and he's also representing the Nordic Jewish Communities Council of Presidents. Then I welcome Chief Rabbi Jair Melchior, representing the Jewish community in Denmark and the Committee of the Orthodox Rabbis in Scandinavia. I welcome Rabbi Ute Steyer, representing the Jewish community of Sweden, and Mr. Jonathan Arkush, President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Then we have also the Muslim communities, which are present and very concerned by this issue. First will Imam Ahmad Setec speak. He has an MA degree in Islamic Studies from Al-Azhar University in Cairo and represents the Islamic Culture Center of Iceland. Chief Imam Syed Ali Abbas Razawi is representing the Scottish Ahlul Bayt Society. Excuse my pronunciation, I am not very good nor in English nor in Arabic. Then we have Adam Anbari, who is representing the Islamic Foundation of Iceland, and Mr. Atik Ali, President of the Islam Congregation of Finland, and representing also the Finland's Muslim Network. After that, there will be a pause. And after the pause, we will go over more to the medical point of view, and we will listen to Dr. Ty Eriksson. He's obstetrician and gynecologist, specialist in pelvic reconstructive. He's a pelvic reconstructive surgeon. He's from the United States. Dr. Baldur Tumi Baldursson. He's a chief medical doctor in skin and venereal disease at the National Hospital here in Reykjavik. Mr. Sveit Svavarsson will represent Intact Iceland, which has been very involved in in the issue of circumcision, and in this organization there are many members of medical branch, many nurses, so he will represent this organization. Then we will listen to Professor Dr. Bernard Lobel, who is an urologist, former chief doctor at the hospital of Rennes in France. And then Father Heikki Huttunen, he's the General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches. And Dr. Elisabetta Kitanovic, she's also from the Conference of European Churches, and she's there, the Human Rights Executive Secretary. And at the end, you have on your list Monsignor Duarte da Cunha. He's a Catholic, General Secretary of the Council of Bishops' Conferences of Europe. He will not be present. He didn't make it at the last minute, but he sent a statement which will be read. I welcome all of you. Maybe some of you would ask, why are the Christian churches also represented in this issue, because it concerns more directly the Jewish communities and the Muslim communities. Well, I think there are many reasons for that. I won't tell them now, but I would just make one point. In the year 45, that's almost 2,000 years ago, there was a conference in Jerusalem. There, the early church had to tackle with many important issues, and the apostles came together and took the decisions, and that was the first council of the Christian church. And the main topic of that, in that conference, was the circumcision of boys. So you see, it's not exactly the newest topic. So we continue with that, and now I give the word to Mrs. Margaret Steinarsdottir, who is director of the Human Rights Center of Iceland, and she will be the moderator in our conference. Please, Margaret Steinarsdottir. Is the typing out? Yeah.
So hello everyone. We have 17 people speaking here today. So I have to keep a tight rein on things. And with a lipstick, I wrote down 2 minutes. So when you have 2 minutes left, I will hold up this paper. And then when the 10 minutes are up, I will lift this, stop, and then you're supposed to stop, because otherwise we will be here until the middle of the night. Now, I also have a list here of people who want to either come up with reflections or questions during the discussion, which we will be having after the second break. And already we have 2 names on the list, and I will put it here with a pen so you can write down your name. And now, just to, to keep my promise, I'm calling the first speaker today, Mr. Ólafur Þór Gunnarsson. The floor is yours.
There we go. Svona ekki. Skiptum með þessu hér. Okay. Good afternoon. Those of you visiting from abroad, welcome to Iceland. We're here to discuss what's been talked about in media as Bill 183, which the presenters of the bill before Parliament basically view as a human rights bill, or a right of children. At the beginning of my discussion, I would like to point out to you that I have been in contact with the organizers of this conference beforehand, discussing the issue that male presenters at this conference are, to say the least, very overrepresented, and this is not what my party, or which is a feminist movement in Iceland, would stand for, at least not on a regular basis. So anyways, without further ado, this works, or doesn't it? I can hit this, that's fine. It changes here. See. Okay. Þetta hefur tekið að tímanum, sko. Okay, there we go. Okay, the bill in the context of Iceland's legal code. In 2005, female circumcision was banned by Icelandic law following a pretty intense debate. The same law was passed in the United Kingdom in 1995. Iceland's law and constitution requires equal protection and rights regardless of gender, religion, ethnicity, race, and so on. And several articles of the Constitution address equality and human rights. The current bill confers the same protection to boys as it does for girls. And I ask you to keep this in mind throughout my talk, because that's basically what the presenters of the bill are viewing this as. Now, Iceland has a pretty extensive record on human rights. We pride ourselves of various things or milestones as far as human rights are concerned. We legalized gay and lesbian marriage in 2010. We passed the Gender Equality Act in 1976, and this year the Equal Pay Act was put into effect for both genders. We also elected the first woman president in the world in 1980, and in 2009 our first female president was also an openly gay or lesbian woman. We were one of the first states in the world to recognize the State of Israel. We were the first country to recognize the Palestinian state, and the first country to recognize the Baltic states. So our human rights record speaks for itself. Now, the UN Convention on the Child Rights was presented for signature and ratification by the member states in 1989. The UN Convention was signed by the Icelandic government in 1990 and ratified by the Icelandic Parliament in 1992. The convention was legalized in Iceland in 2013. Now, we see this as a question of human rights. No person should be subject to unnecessary operations without their consent. As the procedure is irreversible, it takes away the child's rights to make its own decisions on issues of religion and culture or tradition. The Convention on the Child's Rights states this in various articles, that this is a basic right of every child. The Convention further states that on issues of religious and traditional practices, the child should be at the center of the decisions. Now, you will hear today, and you've probably heard throughout the debate, that there are various medical data that will be presented. Now, there are several reports that have shown that in high-risk populations, the risk of HIV infection is lessened in men who are circumcised. Now, this is in high-risk population, and these are adults. There are also some reports on the lower infection rate of human papillomavirus. And again, this is adults, not infant children. And by the way, human papillomavirus can be vaccinated against with a very effective vaccine, as you probably know. There is some reduction in the rate of urinary tract infections, with most reports stating that the number needed to treat is 80 boys circumcised to prevent one infection. The complications, first the immediate ones, which are not common. I must state that there are varying reports, but most reports will vary the incidence between 1 and 10%, depending on both who practices the circumcision, how it's done, and so on. These are, as you can see, infections, bleeding, scarring, and in very rare instances, amputation. And there, unfortunately, have been some reports of children dying as a consequence of the operation. The long-term complications, I decided basically to put down here that they're largely unknown. Many of them are anecdotal and personal, and there are accounts of psychological trauma, sexual dysfunction, and so on and so forth. But to my knowledge, there are not very many, let's say, scientifically strong research that have been done on this issue in particular. So that's basically that. Now, the indications for infant circumcision, there are currently no absolute medical indications to routine circumcision of infant boys. And this is extremely important because we, as medical professionals or as a society, we should not condone operations on anybody that aren't medically indicated. Several structural abnormalities, most of which are rare or relatively rare, require interventions, most of which do not require circumcision to alleviate. Now, that's also important because most of the problems that occur, for example, let's say balanitis, phimosis, and so on and so forth, these are not ailments that need a full circumcision to be alleviated, and therefore are extremely rare, to say the least. Now, infections such as balanitis, urethritis, and other local infections can almost always be remedied with less invasive methods than a circumcision. Now, for the medical professions in here, now, most of you have heard this old old Latin saying, so to speak, primum non nocere, or first do no harm. This is extremely important for both for me as a physician and for probably most healthcare professionals. We're trained very rigorously to adhere to this, that your first order of the day is whatever you do with your patients or for your patients, do not harm them. Now, there are cultural reasons, obviously, and traditional for circumcision. Now, the most common one that you at least several medical organizations, including the British, state that when asked, this is the most common reason, that the parents want their child to look like their father. There are some perceived hygienical reasons which may in some cultures adhere, but mostly, routine cleaning with water and soap will do the trick. Now, concerns that the child will be singled out should obviously be a both-way argument. That is, in a society where nobody is circumcised, a child that is circumcised is under danger of being singled out, and vice versa. Now, religion is a very important personal issue for most, and a very private one as well. Now, history shows that religions evolve over time and adapt to the society they're a part of, and all the major religions have a history of this. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and so on and so forth. We all have evolved with the changes in society, and I see that as a very positive thing. Iceland's constitution clearly states the freedom of religion, and the UN Convention of the Child's Rights also states that a child should not be, this right should not be taken away from a child. Now, some of the issues raised during the debate in Parliament, I know my time is short, so I'll go quickly through these. You can read these, but basically, these are all issues that both the committee, the Judicial Committee, will take into account, and also should, the comments that have been raised in the committee are also here, and these will also be taken into account by the committee. Now, in conclusion, the presenters of the bill see it as their duty to protect the rights of children. There are no absolute medical indications for routine circumcision of children. And finally, religions that continue to adapt to the societies in which they're practiced will remain strong and continue to be the driving forces of well-being of the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. I hope everyone will keep to their time limit as well as you have. And our next speaker is the Ombudsman for Children in Iceland, Salve Nordal.
Getur þú hjálpað mér með þetta? Þetta hérna, þessi. Sé ekki þetta. Getur þú þessi hérna? Og hvað er út í þessu? Svona. Svo hér. Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here at this conference. I think it's very important that we debate this sensitive issue from different perspectives. And mine is going to be the rights of children. As an ombudsman for children here in Iceland, we represent children's rights and interest on the basis of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, and we promote the full implementation of CRC, promote increased prioritization of children, to increase the awareness of children's rights and provide a channel for the views of children. That's a very important part of the CRC. The main principles, just to go over it, main principles of CRC, I mean, it has been ratified here in Iceland. It was done several years ago, and it requires new way of thinking about children, especially that we look at children as independent right holders. So young people, they are granted special rights, independent, for instance, of their parents. And then we have 4 fundamental principles: principle of non-discrimination, primacy of the child's interests, promotion of child's fullest development, and respect for child's view, which is very important in the debate is taking place here. What I'm going to do here in this very short talk is to go over a statement that was issued by the Nordic Ombudsman for Children in 2013, and it was also signed by many pediatric experts, and it was signed by the Ombudsman of Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, and then the National Council for Children in Denmark. They don't call it Ombudsman there, but it's a very similar organization. And I'm just going to go through it word by word, because I think it's important for the debate, because this is, of course, referred to a lot, this statement, in the debate here in Iceland. Circumcision performed without a medical indication on a person who is incapable of giving consent violates fundamental principles of medical ethics, not least because the procedure is irreversible, painful, and may cause serious complications. As all of us were saying here before, it's not often that happens, but it had happened, for instance, just prior to the signature of the statement, both in Norway and Sweden. complications that led to death of infants. There are no health-related reasons for circumcising young boys in the Nordic countries. Circumstances that may make circumcision advantageous for adult men are of little relevance to young boys in the Nordic countries, and on these matters, the boys will have the opportunity to decide for themselves when they reach the age and maturity required to give consent. And as will come later, the opportunity to decide for themselves and have a view is a very important part of CRC, or the convention. As Ombudsman for Children and pediatric experts, we are of the opinion that circumcision without a medical indication is in conflict with Article 12 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which addresses the child's right to express his or her own views in all matters concerning him or her. And this is the very fundamental issue. And Article 24.3, which states that children must be protected against traditional practices that may be prejudicial to their health. And the statement continues, in 2013, the UN Human Rights Council also encouraged all countries to ban harmful practices that compromise the integrity and dignity of the child and are prejudicial to the health of boys and girls. We see it as fundamental that parents' rights in this context do not prevail over children's right to bodily integrity. The best interest of the child must always be in primary consideration, even if this can reduce the rights of adults to perform religious or traditional practices. We would like, the Nordic Ombudsman for Children, in conjunction with pediatric experts, therefore wish to work towards a situation where circumcision without medical indication may only be carried out if a boy who has reached the age and maturity required in order to understand the necessary medical information chooses to consent to the procedure. And this is again the reference to Article 12, and this does not mean that we are talking about children or someone who is of age 18 or something, but of course the right of the child to have a view comes much earlier. We would like to see a respectful dialogue between all involved parties on how to best ensure that boys will be able to exert their influence on the issue of circumcision. We also encourage our national government to inform about the rights of the child and the health-related consequences of the procedure. We request our government to take necessary measures to ensure that boys are given the opportunity to decide for themselves whether or not they want to be circumcised. So this is the statement, and I thought it was important to have that sort of on the table, because that is the reference point. Then the question is about the legal implementation. As you see from the statement, it does not include a suggestion on how the ban should be implemented or how this should be regulated. Rather than, and it is our view of my office, that rather than implementing it with a provision in the general penal code, we should adopt a general law on the right to physical integrity of children. And then that would also have a broader view and would include, for instance, intersex children, and would not allow for early or medical interventions during the early childhood, for instance, of intersex children. Finally, I just want to emphasize that the Nordic statement encourages dialogue which respects different views, and therefore I really welcome this debate. I think it's very good that we have a conference like this where we have all these different views. This is a complex issue. We are well aware of that, and I think, but still, I think the parliamentary bill has offered an opportunity to debate this topic, but of course it also takes time often to discuss complex and issues like this. So, and I'm sure that this conference is going to be a very important platform for this dialogue, and I look forward to having this debate today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Salver. And now we will hear Rabbi Moshe Levine, the Vice President of the European Conference of Rabbis.
I want first to thank the Conference of European Churches for organizing this debate, which is very important. I would like to thank them because I thought the debate should be by the Parliament before, with the people, with the Jewish community, with the Muslim community, before pushing a bill to ban circumcision. In the portion of the Bible that we'll read this week, in all our European synagogues, God insists about newborn male. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. In Genesis, a lot of times also, we have same statements. And God said to Abraham, "And you shall keep my covenant between you and your seed after you, throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall observe between me and between you, between your seed after you, that every male among you be circumcised." This fundamental biblical injunction, ordained by God for all generations, allows the Jewish child to enter to the covenant with God. The Torah insists so much on this commandment that it forbids for a Jewish non-circumcised man to consume the Paschal lamb. Indeed, the festival of Pesach marks the constitution of the Jewish people and its birth after 2010 years of slavery. And a man who voluntarily would not be circumcised marks his break with the history of the Jewish people. Judaism does not obey to dogmas, but a practice of law called mitzvot. The practice of this law is consubstantial with Judaism. When a Jew does not have the opportunity to practice them, is rich in the depths of his faith. Circumcision and the Jewish identity of a boy are innately inseparable. Ancient Greece, prohibition of circumcision occurred when the Syrian Greeks sought to force Hellenization in the Judeans 2,000 years ago. At that time, performing a circumcision on one child became a capital crime. More recently, Soviet Union prohibited without success, because for 5,000 years, and despite the persecution of the Jews, they always been careful and determined to practice this important mitzvah. The Talmud, which is the oral law, in Nedarim, said, "Great is the circumcision, for it counterbalances all the other laws of the Torah." Circumcision is so important that it may be performed on a Shabbat or on a Jewish holiday like Yom Kippur, despite prohibition of drawing blood on these days. Abraham performed it by a divine commandment. at 99 years old. Abraham circumcised himself as an adult, but his son Yitzhak was the first of his descendants to be circumcised as a neonate on the 8 days. At the time of Abraham, anesthesia, asepsis, sterilization did not exist. Today, through circumcision is regulated in Europe, as recommended by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to the member states, and even Iceland, in the resolution 2076. It says, as far as circumcision of young boys is concerned, the Assembly referred to its resolution 1952 on children's right to physical integrity, and out of a concern to protect children's rights, which the Jewish and Muslim communities surely share, recommends that member states provide for ritual circumcision of children not be allowed unless practiced by a person with requisite training and skills in appropriate medical and health conditions. Furthermore, the parents must be duly informed and any potential medical risk or possible contraindication, and take this into account when deciding what is the best for their child, bearing in mind that the child's interest must be concerned for the first priority. I would like today to thank Germany for taking the right decisions when the situation required it. A law was voted in December 12, 2012, authorizing the circumcision of children for religious reasons. The text was adopted by a large majority by the lower house of parliament, Bundestag, with 434 votes in favor, 100 against, and 46 abstentions. In this, if it's obvious that circumcision was a mutilation, as you want to say here in Iceland, Germany, a highly civilized country, particularly concerned with the welfare of childhood, would never have legalized circumcision with such a large majority. Circumcision is one of the commandment practiced in the world by almost all the members of the Jewish community, religious, non-religious, Orthodox, conservative, reform. That's why this law, if it was voted, it will affect all our democratic societies. As far as the Council of Europe does not recommend its prohibition, such a law contrary to religious freedom would beyond doubt be attacked by at the European Court of Human Rights by many Jewish organizations or non-Jewish organizations. Especially would be experienced by the Jewish community, which has been the target during the last decade of violent anti-Semitism in Europe. It will be felt as a message that Jew has no future in Europe. In conclusion, let me say that circumcision is a non-negotiable for Judaism. Therefore, I wish that wisdom and science will prevail by abandoning this bill that could only lead Europe to live through again history of Jew persecutions.
Thank you for your presentation, Rabbi Levine. And our next speaker is Mr. Jaron Nadbornik, President of the Council of Jewish Congregations in Finland, and he's representing the Nordic Jewish Communities Council of Presidents.
I'll speak from this side, I won't show anything. Hello, good afternoon. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing such a debate. I think it's very welcome, and it feels good to be here. The issue of non-medical circumcision concerns in Iceland, as we've heard, mainly the Jewish and the Muslim communities, both of which are very small communities. According to the Jewish faith, an 8-day-old boy is to be circumcised in a ceremony called Brit Milah, and this in some regards corresponds to baptism in Christianity. It is noteworthy, as we heard from Rabbi Levine, that in the Jewish world this commandment is followed very broadly, even surprisingly so when taking into account the variety of opinions on most issues among Jews. This is also the case in Finland, where I'm from. In its directive concerning boys' non-medical circumcision, the Finnish Social and Health Ministry stated in 2015 that non-medical circumcision of boys is not forbidden in any country, as we know, and neither does any international treaty forbid it explicitly. On the contrary, in countries that have laws concerning boys' non-medical circumcision, it is done in a way that allows this Jewish practice to continue. This is the case, for example, in Sweden from 2001, Norway 2014, Germany 2012. It's good to mention also the Parliamentary Assembly, as my previous speaker here, Rabbi Levine, said, the Council of Europe Decision 2076, Section 9, according to which the circumcision is not forbidden under certain prerequisites. These prerequisites have to do with the professional qualifications of the circumciser, but not, for example, with the age of the boy. The stand of the initiative to forbid the circumcision of male children is at stark odds with the prevailing general view globally. Meandering references to international treaties does not change this fact. The forbidding of boys' non-medical circumcision would mean in practice impeding and withering away of Jewish life in Iceland. Taking into account the traditional law-abiding nature of Icelandic citizens, the initiative would mean a hard blow for Icelandic Jews on a practical level, to whom this sudden change in direction and carelessness of its minority would put in question the future of the Jews of Iceland. With this in mind, the question of boys' non-medical circumcision is a freedom of religion and human rights issue of the highest level. The concerned members of the Althing, hope I pronounced that correctly, did not look for guidance further than from the Finnish Supreme Court, which in its decision in 2008, mind you, we also don't have a legislation concerning circumcision of boys. We have a High Court ruling from 2008. It was again in 2016 verified. It still stands. States the following: circumcision performed for religious reasons can be estimated to have a positive influence, particularly for the boy himself, for the development of his identity, and for attaching him to his religious and social community. Due to these reasons, the medical adequacy of non-medically motivated circumcision and tampering with the boy's bodily inviolability can be found defendable, and judging as a whole to be such a minor procedure that the child's custodian's conduct by having such a procedure done on their child cannot be seen as an act violating the child's best interest and justice that would be punishable as assault. The Supreme Court could hardly have come to this kind of conclusion unless non-medically motivated circumcision of boys would also be a procedure which is medically defendable. This is further proven by the fact that medically motivated circumcisions are performed approximately 1,000 per year in Finland. Unfortunately, I don't have the data for the other Nordic countries. I'm talking about medically motivated circumcisions. This means it is a medically approved treatment. We understand the difference easily if we compare this to girls' and women's genital mutilation, sometimes erroneously referred to as circumcision as well. We are not aware of any clinical illness or disease that could be treated or prevented by mutilating girls' genitals. On the contrary to boys' circumcision, female genital mutilation is not defendable or justifiable from this perspective. On the contrary to boys, even if some group would deem it essential cultural or religiously ritual. Let us assume correspondingly that the group XYZ habits include amputating the left hand's pinky finger as a sign of belonging. The initiators of forbidding circumcision for boys would in this case be correct when referring to the laws and international treaties concerning a child's right to bodily inviolability. They are, however, not suited for estimating the issue of non-medically motivated circumcision, and typically proponents of forbidding circumcision are unable to show how they would be relevant. From a medical and treatment ethics perspective, non-medically motivated circumcision is comparable mostly to the fairly standard removal of the wisdom teeth, which is often done in an anticipatory fashion without making sure that the teeth at hand are in fact going to cause harm or inconvenience to the person receiving treatment. The commandment to circumcise infant boys in Judaism is not per se based on health reasons, but if the practice would be detrimental from a health perspective, it could not be defended from a Jewish or any other Western moral perspective. It's noteworthy the American Association of Pediatrics, AAP, their conclusion from 2012, defending non-medically motivated circumcision. Interestingly, I talked about a doctor in a debate in Finland about this very statement, and he said, yes, but they are so culturally inclined to be for it. I said, yes, but you are culturally inclined to be against it. They claim that evaluation of current evidence indicates that the health benefits of newborn male circumcision outweigh the risks, and the benefits of newborn male circumcision justify access to this procedure for those families who choose it. Even if there are some other sources that question the net benefit using other emphasis, as we heard from the doctor in the first part, the research results are unsurpassable that it's impossible to claim that a medically adequately performed circumcision would be a physical assault or something similar that would lead the male infant in question in need of protection of the lawmaker. Myself and the Central Council of Jewish Communities in Finland, even in our own country when we debate this topic, we don't have any objection to devising new legislation concerning non-medically motivated circumcision, presupposing that it corresponds to a large degree to the legislation prevalent in Sweden, Norway, and Germany. All countries with the same level of medical, social, and moral standards as Iceland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Natbornik. And now the next speaker is Chief Rabbi Shai Melchior, and he's representing the Jewish community in Denmark and the Committee of the Orthodox Rabbis in Scandinavia.
I'll try not to repeat what was said before, so just thank you again for organizing this debate. My previous speakers referred to the sources why the circumcision is so important. I just want to refer you to this place today. We have here 3 representatives of the Nordic Jewish communities. We have a Jewish representative of all over Europe who came to Iceland, a country with approximately 35, 40 Jews, to come and protect the idea of circumcision. That shows the significance of how important this is to the Jewish people. And I have to say, I don't come here as an advocate of circumcision. My goal is not to convince you that circumcision is the best thing to do for your children. If you want to, I know some good people to do it, but it's not that the case. The issue is not a medical issue, just as been told again and again. Because yes, Jews don't do it because of medical reasons, and just as Muslims don't do it because of medical reasons. It is about the question of relations between minorities and majorities. This ban didn't come to the world, this suggestion of a ban of circumcision didn't come to the world of nowhere in Iceland. It comes after a very long debate that we also saw in, I don't read fluently Icelandic, but in the thing that we read in the media, it came from Danish doctors, who I also know personally talked and pressed some Islamic people in Iceland to bring this ban because they believed here there's a chance because there's no objections, because there's no Jews, and there's no long tradition of people who do it. In Denmark, this debate continued over 20 years. It's 20 years that the Jewish community that lived in Denmark for 400 years, for the first time, is under a real threat in that way. And I think the last 2 years, almost every day there are articles about banning circumcision in Denmark. We live, and my family lived 400 years in Denmark. The last 20 years, the first time we need to, we have just, for the first time, we have a lobbyist working the community. Never we had to work to protect our right to be in Denmark as Jews. And this is what it is about. As I said, it's not about if it was a medical question, if it was a problem, if it was something, then we could have a debate. But as soon as there's no medical indication for anything bad, then there shouldn't be any debate. Because then it's only a question of a majority that doesn't understand a minority that is different. And yes, we are different. I'm Jew. I'm different. I'm not Christian. I don't believe in the same thing. I'm not atheist. I respect people with other views. But this is do you, as a society, do you as a majority come and say, we know better than all of you what is good for your children? As I said, if there was indication for any problems, then we didn't need an argument, because we, as parents, would ourselves find what would be the best for our children. We wouldn't need you if there was a question. But there is none. And that is the basic of all this discussion. It said before, as you presented, about it's an unnecessary treatment. It is necessary for us. And you could say, yeah, but I can't understand it because I don't believe in your Torah. Fine, I don't ask you to believe in my Torah. I ask you to let me believe in my Torah. This is what it is about. It's about, can we have difference in our society? This is the question. And I believe, I've been in Iceland before. I met wonderful people from Iceland. I moved to Denmark from Israel, and Denmark is an amazing place, a country that saved its Jews in World War II. And I walked around everywhere in the world saying, I'm from Denmark. I'm from the country that had wanted the Jews with them, that were happy in welcoming us coming back from Sweden after the war. And for the first time, when I walk in Jewish communities in the world and say I come from Denmark, they ask me, well, but why do they hate you so much? No, they don't. They don't. They really don't. They just don't understand how it's important for us. And yes, it's hard to explain. It's hard to understand. And I don't want you to understand. If you really want to go into it, you're welcome. But let us continue to be good parents as we try to be. This is what it is about. Through the history of the Jewish people, as it was mentioned before, circumcision was attacked. It was attacked for the sake of persecuting the Jews. I know that now it is not the same case. The reasoning behind it, the people I meet, I believe they come from a positive motivation of children's rights and liberal views that are very important to the world. I don't want that the risk of taking the idea of the Children Convention and say this is against circumcision. What will happen if you do that is that you push out all the Jewish and Muslim countries in the world that also signed on that treaty. And when you say to them, this includes circumcision, that will push them out of a treaty that is so crucial for the world. We are part of one society who fight for the same things, same beliefs. And this is crucial. If you go and ban circumcision, you stable Jews and Muslims and actually it's the United States of America, because also 60%, 58% of the Americans do that. You staple them as not part of the fight for children's rights. That's not the case. We want to fight together with you on these crucial elements of freedom to everyone. We just see a circumcision as part of this. It's not my right as a child, as a father. In the Jewish perspective, it's my obligation toward my children. It's him I'm looking at. It's not my ceremony. This is what we do. And yes, you don't have to do the same. It's not, as I started, I'm not an advocate for circumcision. I advocate for place to every person, that a society can be pluralistic and have place to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Melchior. And now I welcome Rabbi Ute Steyer. He's representing the Jewish community of Sweden, or she is.
Yes. I'm trying to tip the gender balance a little bit, but I realize it's a lost cause. It's not only that I'm one of the few female speakers, as somebody pointed out so correctly, I also want to take the opportunity to say that I'm a rabbi. I'm the rabbi of Stockholm, and I'm also the rabbi of the Great Synagogue in Stockholm, which is conservative, Masorti, meaning I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. And still, this is something that affects me as a Jew and as a rabbi as much as it does my Orthodox colleagues, with whom I cooperate on many things, and on many things we don't see eye to eye. But this is something where we do see eye to eye. And this is something where I also see eye to eye with my Reform colleagues, with whom I otherwise don't see eye to eye. You know, where there's two Jews, there are three opinions. But this is something, actually, where that is not necessarily the case. This is something where we actually really see this as a very important issue for us. And as my colleague Yair pointed out, this has something to do with medical reasons, because this debate is always coming there. But for us, this is not primarily the reason. For us, this is a ethnic, religious, cultural, historical signifier. It connects us to our past, to our present, and our future. This is something that is of utmost importance. And it means that we are different. Yes, we are different. In many things, we do weird things. My neighbors sometimes wonder what I'm building in my backyard each fall that looks like a little hut. If you don't know it, it's actually the Feast of Tabernacles. And they think what I'm doing. Yes, we are different. But you know what? I realized coming here, sitting on the plane, talking to my neighbor, who was Icelandic, so are Icelanders. You are Europeans, and yet you are quite different. You are Scandinavians, and yet you are quite different from most Scandinavians that I know. Many of you are Christians, and still you do things a bit different here. I saw the little stone piles on the highway going from the airport. Being different is not necessarily something that's wrong. But I do get it that you don't understand, or some of you don't understand circumcision. You don't have it, you don't practice it. It looks weird to you. I grew up with it. I lived for many, many years in the United States, as Yair said, where something like 60% of the male population is circumcised and still circumcises, where that is considered to be the most normal thing in the world. And it is done by completely secular, non-Jewish, non-Muslim Americans as well. What I often encounter is, in these discussions, that we have a conflation where medical arguments, where the medical discussion is continuously conflated with a discussion about religious freedom and the right to self-determination. And honestly, these are three different conferences. They should be dealt separately. One is the question of in what extent human rights issues or the Children's Convention has anything to do with the issue. Another thing would be the discussion on theology. I'm immediately on that one. And the third one would be a purely medical debate. But to constantly conflate these issues, I find is highly problematic. And it is counterproductive, because it doesn't really lead to that we are looking at the issue. All we're doing is that we're polemicizing. I come from Sweden. I'm not originally, but I live in Sweden. And Sweden has, since 2001, a regulation about how circumcisions, infant male circumcision, is performed. Some previous speaker mentioned that that was done as the result of a problematic, tragic cases of circumcision gone wrong in Sweden. Actually, that's not correct. What is correct is that in what caused the tragic cases, one was a tragic case in the Muslim community where a boy, a 5-year-old boy, became paralyzed. That was not because of the circumcision. That was because the doctor in the hospital insisted on giving a spinal anesthesia. A spinal anesthesia is one of the most complicated things to give, and also it causes the most incidents, negative incidents. That led to the paralyzation of that boy. Sometime afterwards, there was a circumcision performed on a 1-month-old boy. The boy, coming home, became a bit lethargic. The boy was taken back to the hospital where the doctor had performed the circumcision. It was also done by a MD in a Swedish hospital. And the boy was given an injection. Unfortunately, the boy died. Afterwards, the Swedish Board of Health conducted a thorough investigation, and the result was that was probably what had happened. Again, it was not the circumcision as such, but that the doctor probably gave the boy an overdose of morphine by mistake. These two cases caused a change in the Swedish regulation for male infant circumcision, leading to that specified exactly how these things are done, who is entitled to do male infant circumcision, what are the qualifications necessary, etc., etc., etc. So if we are taking up these cases, please, we also need to be very sure that we know what actually happened. A third of my pet peeves is please do not equate male circumcision and female gender mutilation. If you're trying to do that and you're making a cheap polemical point about what you're really doing, and here I'm talking as a woman, you're doing a huge disservice to the worldwide struggle and fight against FGM. One is a circumcision, the other one is a gender mutilation. If you are equating these two things, you're trivializing FGM. And that, I cannot believe, is anyone's of yours intention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Steyer. And now we will hear Mr. Jonathan Arkush. He's the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm the President of the British Jewish community, but I've been invited by the World Jewish Congress, the overall body for Jewish communities worldwide, to represent World Jewish Communities to you this afternoon, and I'm very grateful to the organisers, and I share the views of previous speakers that what we need to have is a respectful and informed debate. I want to say that I completely respect Iceland's independence, its traditions, its set of values. And I would say to Icelanders, please equally give me the respect that I am the representative of a 4,000-year-old tradition that also has a set of values and customs by which we have lived and whose values have stood the test of time. Dogmas come and dogmas go. Conventions come and conventions change. But the test of time is important. And I want you to know that I come to help inform, to engage in the debate, and to put the arguments, because I don't think they've been fairly put all the way so far. And I do not come in any sense to say to the Republic of Iceland, I come to impose any pressure, because I don't. I just want the argument to be an informed one. Let me therefore address some of the points made, particularly by the member of the Altingi, Dr. Gunnarsson, and by Salvir Nordal, the Ombudsman for Children in Iceland. They've characterized this debate as a debate about human rights, but neither of them interestingly mentioned that there's another human right, which is inherent in the Universal Convention of Human Rights and in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that is the right to freedom of religion and belief. In fact, while the Ombudsman mentioned a number of provisions of the Convention on the Human Right of the Rights of the Child, no mention at all was made of Article 14, which explicitly upholds the right of the child to be brought up in its own religious values. In fact, the best interests of the child surely are to be brought up within its own values. Indeed, if you comb through the Convention on the Rights of the Child, you won't find any mention of circumcision. You won't even find an implicit reference to circumcision. It's not there, and it's not there for a reason. Now, if there was truly a public health issue, then like others have said before me, of course this is not something that Jewish people would condone. I'm very disturbed, therefore, that in the explanatory notes to the bill before the Altingi, which is sponsored by Dr. Gunnarsson, it says that when circumcision is carried out in a non-hospital environment, such as a home, and by a person such as a religious leader, I respectfully detect some prejudice there, then high rates of infection can occur, even death. I'm very sorry, Dr. Gunnarsson, that's not true. It is a deeply prejudicial and misleading statement. Where I come from in the United Kingdom, circumcision is highly regulated. The people who conduct it are not religious leaders, which carries some pejorative connotation. They are skilled people who are trained, regulated, and examined. The rates of complication of circumcision in a Western developed country, like the Nordic countries, like the United Kingdom, like the United States, the rates of complication are vanishingly small. In fact, the truth is that a parent who takes their child, because parents make many decisions for children, including a Jewish father, of circumcision, the rates of complication are vanishingly small, and frankly, if you take your child on a skiing holiday, you are more likely to cause injury to the child or pierce the child's ears or make other decisions about the child's diet or where they're to sleep or what activities they're to involve in. And I say to the Ombudsman, who put before you, well, let the child choose when they're 16. Let me say to you, respected Ombudsman, If my parents had said to me at 16, Jonathan, we're liberal, we wanted you to choose, now you can choose, I'd have said to them, well, thank you, parents. I'm actually very angry with you. I had a right to be brought up in the values of my fathers and my grandfathers going back thousands of years at the age of 8 days, when I certainly don't have any memory of the procedure. I should tell you I've just come from Israel when my grandson was circumcised, my 4th grandson, by a urologist, a procedure carried out expertly. My children are fine, my grandchildren are fine. I would have been very upset with my parents to have gone through 16 years being the butt of derision amongst my peers for not looking the same. And I would have said to my parents, thank you, but at 16 there are some pain. There are some medical risks associated with this. I don't think that's a fair choice. And I do not think, with respect to Dr. Gunnarsson, it is right for him to say, religions must adapt. That's my decision, Dr. Gunnarsson. It's not correct for you to say that about me. Please respect my faith, even if you don't share it. And I respect your views equally. But I don't try and impose my views on you, and I respectfully ask you not to impose it on me. And if you are imposing it on me, then essentially what you're engaged in is a sort of fundamentalism. You can have religious fundamentalism, you can also have secular fundamentalism. And imposing a ban on something which you happen to disagree with, I would respectfully say, is a fundamentally illiberal thing to do for a Western liberal democracy. If you want to start with interfering with something you disagree with, surely there must be an important public harm issue, and there isn't with circumcision. Try smoking. Everyone agrees that smoking causes harm. It causes harm to the smoker, it causes harm to other people exposed, it causes harm to every single person because we all pay higher taxes because of the cost of dealing with healthcare. And please, finally, I say to my respected friends in Iceland, please never send the signal that Jews are not welcome in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Arkosh, for your presentation. And now I welcome Imam Ahmad Setec. He holds an MA degree in Islamic Studies from the Al-Azhar University and represents the Islamic Cultural Center of Iceland.
Good afternoon. Lots of points have been discussed, but basically I want to refer to some basic articles or principles in Islam which are regarded in Arabic as fitra. And here comes a reference in Islam to circumcision. Islam regards circumcision as one of the natural dispositions, that things that people are supposed to do naturally, everybody. And this is why it is traced back to the Abrahamic religion, as Prophet Abraham was circumcised, and in the Bible Jesus was circumcised as well. And it is a Jewish habit and or practice and a Muslim practice as well. Circumcision in Islam, it is something that scholars agree on. It is part of Islamic faith. There are always different opinions about how mandatory it is, but generally speaking, it is something that is regarded a religious practice and a cultural practice as well. And I mean by cultural practice that some people who are Muslims and not necessarily practicing Islam, they still respect this practice and regard it part of their culture, the culture they were born and raised in. And from that point of view, they care and find it very essential for them respecting their culture, their traditions, and passing it to their children. And here I want to refer actually to one article in the UN Convention of child rights, because we had many quotations in this conference from the UN Convention. So I just wanted to refer to one important article number 30. Let me read it. It says, in those states in which ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities or persons of indigenous origin exist, a child belonging to such a minority or who is indigenous shall not be denied the right in community with other members of his or her group to enjoy his or her own culture, to profess and practice his or her own religion, or to use his or her own language. So this is an article in the UN Convention which clearly mentioned the right of the children to be raised the way their parents are raised, and according to their faith, according to their traditions and the practices. And the circumcision comes here as part of this culture and of these practices that, according to the UN Convention, it should be respected. I know there has been some points, some reference to Article 24 about, from the same UN Convention, that the children must be protected against the traditional practices prejudicial to their health, that's harmful to their health. And actually here comes the point which is questionable. Is it really harmful to their health or not? And this is what we will hear in detail from respected specialists when they start talking about this issue. The reports and the studies, especially the American Pediatric Academy, had a position against circumcision in the beginning, and then they changed the point of view after finding out that there are lots of benefits, and that the benefits overweigh the risks of circumcision. So this issue also we want to discuss it within the society. When this bill was proposed, Muslim community and Jewish community were not discussed about this issue. And we expected actually to be questioned and just find some kind of respect before issuing this. We are living in the country, and we have a community here which is not small community compared to the population in Iceland. And people started asking me, actually, Muslims who have born babies, boys, are asking now and waiting, are they going to be allowed to have their children, their boys, circumcised or not? And we hope the answer will be yes. This issue, actually, I want to refer to it from some arguments of those who are opponent to circumcision, raise that it is violating the human right of bodily integrity, that parents may breach only to treat illness. Like, parents are only allowed if they are going to treat some illness the boys are suffering from. Then only an adult can consent to permanent alteration of the body. Actually, this issue has some questions or problems because the bodily integrity in this sense is breached by ear piercing, by removing tonsils sometimes, which is a decision taken by parents without counseling the children, and sometimes it is not necessary. Translating the law and the articles, it can be translated differently. And what I think and I believe in is that we should also have a look at the religious freedom which our children have as part of their rights according to the UN Convention. And we need also to think about the consequences or the repercussions of when the boys grow up and they are religious and they want to practice this circumcision. Imagine the sufferings and the difficulties they are going to face at this age, and they will of course fear this operation. It will become kind of operation, a surgery, but when it is done at very young age, it is like a tiny medical procedure and less risky and less painful as well. So we need also to think about this, and that can cause a bad reaction in the society. People feel they are isolated. We hear now the Jewish community saying, don't make us feel we are not welcome in the country. And that is true. We need to respect each other's culture, religious practices, and it is only those who want to do it can do it. Doing circumcision for boys will not cause harm to the public society. If there is real harm afflicted by practicing circumcision, it will not be some harm afflicted on the whole society, but being even harmful, it is something questionable. So we hope that this bill will be discussed again and again, and it will end up with giving some conclusion that would be pleasing to each and every member of the society of Iceland. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Setec. And now I welcome the Chief Imam Syed Ali Abbas Rasavi. He's representing the Scottish Alul Bait Society.
Good afternoon. If I could just start by thanking the Interfaith Forum of Iceland, the Conference of European Churches, Council of Bishops Conference of Europe, Chief Rabbi Shuji wasn't able to make it, and our other guests and hosts and so forth who are here and have greeted us very well. Firstly, I'd like to start off by thanking Iceland for hosting us, and at the same time for what's been so far a respectable discussion. I feel that we're friends, come together, and as you can see, it's a very important discussion to have. A wide cross-section of society is here from the Jewish communities, from the Muslim communities, from the Christian communities, and so forth. Quite a diverse cross-section of European society, I'd say. So therefore, I think it's important that it is done in a friendly manner, and the discussion must be informed. With that, I'd like to commend, as mentioned, that Iceland has a very good record of human rights. But naturally, not everything is black and white. There are areas of gray and there's areas of interpretation. And what we're dealing with today is interpretation. That on the one hand, you have rights for children, but on the other, you have the freedom of worship and belief. And I think that this is something which is very important because it has severe implications. As you've seen so far, there's been great passion around this. The ability to be able to practice, the ability to be able to worship, the ability to be able to raise your children in your faith. And that's something which has been taking place for thousands of years. So just like the Jewish community, the Muslim community also has circumcision. It's something that's been passed down from Abraham. On the one hand, Ishmael, on the one hand, Isaac, both of whom have been instructed to circumcise. So you've got a tradition which is going back thousands of years, in fact, it predates Islam. And from the advent of Islam, we find this as an Abrahamic tradition, that we circumcise our children. Now, I think what's also important to bear in mind is that we cannot confuse this with female genital mutilation. And I think that's very important to put that to one side. That here we're looking at male circumcision, We are all united against female genital mutilation. But what's important is to look at what the context of this discussion is and not to conflate two different topics together. And that is in regards to male circumcision. I think the pretext has been so far that, or the primacy of the rights of children or what's good for a child, sometimes it looks to me, and this discussion has looked to me, that a parent doesn't really know what's good for their children. And that's something that's been coming across from the first two speakers, the idea that we as parents may not know what's good for our children and grandchildren. You've heard from some of our guests, some of the speakers before, that their grandchildren, their children, and themselves, bearing in mind, in this room you have Muslims and Jews who actually circumcise as children. Psychological damage, well, I think some of our speakers have spoken very well. I didn't notice any psychological damage, which was there. In terms of the question regarding the medical data, I've looked at the medical data. Just last night I was speaking to the Office of the Undersecretary of State, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations. And there was an emphasis there that they are really keeping or monitoring this particular discussion. If it was so clear, they would have released something against it, but they're actually looking towards this discussion with eagerness to see if it's fair, if the discussion is an open discussion, if the discussion is an informed discussion. Based upon those statistics, you've looked at complications. In fact, the statistics say that 1.6% of procedure that's been carried out, there's been complications, and that too, as you've heard, is incompetency on the side of the medical practitioners. So I think when we are presenting data, especially when it comes to data in terms of hindrances, we need to look at it correctly and not obscure the data. I think the other thing is that, yes, we've looked at it in terms of, or the first speaker to talk about lower risks of HIV, and then HPV, UTI, all of which has been commissioned by the World Health Organization. So it's not something that's come from one body, but it's something which is looking multifaceted discussion that's taken place. Look, you've also heard best practice, and I think that Europe has put forward best practice. It's not something, Europe is not a monolith either, and Western countries or democratic countries are not monoliths. I think best practice needs to also come forward. You've looked at the example of Germany. You've looked at examples of Sweden. In fact, you've looked at examples of the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Norway, the ability to practice your religion, but at the same time, we've looked at religion and circumcision in these countries. And I think that's something which is important. We must also take the example of the United States. It's a very big democracy. It needs to be taken into consideration. You've heard 58% to 60% of males are circumcised. And again, as my friend pointed out, the idea of culture comes into play. As you said, that there's a culture of circumcision, though there may not be a culture here. But the fact of the matter is that whatever the culture is, we must understand the sensitivities of the discussion. And here the sensitivities of the discussion is religious sensitivities. It's paramount to both of the faiths. It's paramount to many of the Abrahamic faiths. The circumcision is something which is there, something which has been practiced for thousands of years. And to ban circumcision is tantamount to saying to those faiths which uphold circumcision that you're not welcome here. It's not something that you can evolve into. If you were to ban circumcision, those faiths wouldn't just evolve. Many of our rites, many of our rituals are based around that. For example, a Muslim, when he goes to Hajj, has to be circumcised. Hajj is a pillar. He has to go to Hajj, or he and she, Muslims have to go to Hajj. Male has to be circumcised, for example. There's certain things that a Muslim will not be able to do. So therefore, I think that we need to think on the religious implications as well. We're living in a democracy. We have differences. We have different people. Needs and wants needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just look at it from the basis of secularism only. And I think somebody rightly said that as you have religious fundamentalism, we are seeing a rise in Europe of secular fundamentalism. And as the European Commission has said time and time again, secular fundamentalism is actually outstripping religious fundamentalism. And this would come into that discussion, to polarize a group of people would lead to persecution of those people. If you're telling those people that, look, you are not allowed to practice, what happens? Are they able to live here comfortably? Are we living in a society that doesn't accept faith? The 20th century has seen many changes. We cannot reverse some of those changes that we saw in the 20th century. We're moving forward in the 21st century to a pluralism, and there doesn't seem to be pluralism if the right facts of the discussion are not put on the table. So look, I'm not here to criticize, I'm not here to condemn. What we're saying is, let's have a healthy discussion. Let's talk about this. Let's make sure that we're sitting as friends to discuss all the different parameters of this discussion, and let our decisions be informed. It's very important to have decisions made through being educated on the implications on one way or the other. Yes, on the one hand, we have the issue of medicine, but on the other hand, we also have freedom, and I don't think that they're colliding. We've looked at the statistics, we've had a discussion on the statistics, that actually it is a safe process. It's something that's being done. Complications are very limited. So my closing words are this. For God's sake, let's be fair. Let's not feed into either anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, bigotry. Let's be equal partners in this discussion so that we can move forward together, united and not divided. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam Razavi. And now we will hear Adam Ambari. He's representing the Islamic Foundation of Iceland.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome our guests. I will begin with, as Icelanders, Muslims, Icelanders living here in Iceland. Personally, I was for 29 years here in Iceland. First time I was hearing, I was really shocked when I hear the ban of circumcision for Muslims here. And the number of Muslims families are increasing here in Iceland. And also Iceland is signing an agreement with the United Nations to receive seeking asylums, families. But they forget to say, just we will ban circumcision for your kids. The number is increasing, and as we representing Muslims, sometimes we apologize to answer to our brother Muslims in the mosque or anywhere. So we have to protect our value in Iceland. And my speech, I will not read because all my friends, they were already talking about this issue. I will just resume it in few lines. We Muslims, along with the Jewish community, believe that it's divinely ordained that we as parents are personally responsible for our children, for their welfare, and for their health. We believe that an important component and part of this duty to our children is to prepare them as much as possible with preventative health procedures. And our faith have long held that these procedures are critical to wholesome and healthy development of a person toward a good future in their lives. we as a Muslims here in Iceland, we are always proud of be Icelanders also, and to live in Iceland. Since this issue come up, we have a lot of contact. Many people contact us and ask, what's wrong? What's going on? And because they believe for many, many years ago that Iceland, the land of dialogue, free speech, free religions, free for everything, and also human rights. But when it comes up like that, it's a big question mark. It is in our best interest to highlight to our distinguished lawmakers here in Iceland that we, the community of Muslims of Icelandic Foundation of Iceland, are a community of acknowledges the sanctity of Judeo-Christian heritage, a foundation of our nation of Iceland, and that we share much more in common than anywhere we may differ. Thank you. I will not take more time. Thank you.
And now we will be hearing from Atiq Ali. He's the president of the Islam Congregation of Finland and represents Finland Muslim Network.
Could you put the slide on? Because
I have to ask him.
so it's obviously. Could you ask him, please, to put the because somebody shut this down. Could you put my just to show my. No, up. Still. Yeah, that one. This one. Yeah. Thank you. Because somebody shut it down. So. Okay. It's good. No, it's not. It's not working. No. Okay, anyway, well, because it says here that I'm the president of this Islamic Congregation of Finland and representing also the Finnish Muslim network. Well, that's true. In addition to that, actually we flew together with Mr. Jaron Nadbornik from Finland this morning, and I'm the vice president, and he's also the other vice president of the National Forum for the Cooperation of Religions in Finland, which was established in 2011 and consists of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic congregations. It is good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And the National Forum, actually, it's for fostering peace in the society in the spirit of strengthening freedom of religion. Now, what is freedom of religion, actually? Well, we know it's a human right, and human rights are secular rights, but still it is a human right, and that is why, actually, I'm here. And I'm not going to go to details when it comes to human rights, or, for example, the European Convention for Human Rights, Article 9. Everybody knows what's inside that, and et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you, because of so many speeches we've heard, so it's a suicide to make a speech now, the last one, but I'll try to do my best. So let me tell you a story of of Muslims in Finland. So Islam in Finland isn't anything new. Actually, permanent Islam has been in Finland like 150 years of presence in Finland. And we are Tatars. Tatars, it's a Turkic people, and my great-grandparents emigrated from Russia. So, and why did they? Well, most of them emigrated during the time of the revolution in 1917. And why? Well, we all know the reason is there were no human rights, especially no freedom of religion. Well, in fact, no religion at all, right? But if we look at Russia today, circumcision is no problem. Actually, it's not an issue there. So there's a paradox, obviously. But I would like to keep this in mind, that Islam in Europe is nothing new. For example, in Poland or Lithuania, there has been like 400 or 500 years of Islam without any problems. So this is number one. Circumcision, for myself, it's normal. It's for my son. My son is in the 5th generation. We have been able to protect, preserve, and defend our religion in Finland because the government has given us the freedom of religion, Act of Freedom of Religion in the Constitution, and nowadays, of course, the European Convention, and then the United Nations, and the Article 14 for the children. So obviously, everything seems to be okay. But then here we are. Somehow I'm in Iceland today and leaving tomorrow. So we would have to find a solution for this matter. Of course, we will help you. I would like to assist you in finding a solution to this situation. Of course, you will then do whatever you will do. So one way is to pass a law, and then the other one is, of course, that there's no regulation. And as we've heard in the UK, it is highly regulated, this matter. In Finland, the ministry has regulated, but not that highly as it has done it in the UK. So one way to find a solution to this issue would be to regulate this thing, because I remember in 2013, in June, there was a conference held by the Finnish ombudsman, the child ombudsman. And then there's somebody asked me from the Ministry of Health that what if we passed a law which would ban circumcision of boys? What would that cause? And I told them that it would, in reality, it would mean that people would go outside of Finland, have it, for example, to Germany, or they would do it somewhere, God knows where, maybe in saunas, which would, it would cause, obviously, a lot of and severe problems. So I would welcome a solution where this matter would be regulated, it could be highly regulated, and that we would respect those who are in faith and freedom of religion, and also everybody has the right not to believe in anything. We should respect that as well. This is all I have to say. Thank you once again for the time you've given to me.
Well, thank you all for keeping such excellent time. It's so difficult to present all your viewpoints and thoughts in such a short time, but you've all managed excellently. But now it's time for our break. I'm not sure how long it should be, maybe 15 minutes. So, we'll start again in 15 minutes. And I remind you, if you want to speak during the discussion, to write your names here. Our first speaker after the break is Dr. Ty B. Erickson. He's a obstetrician, gynecologist, and a pelvic reconstructive surgeon from the United States. And we will be giving him extra time because he will also be explaining the World Health Organization rules and procedures regarding male circumcision. So if Mr. Eriksson is here. Yeah.
It is truly a pleasure to be here and to see the incredible diversity. I mean, imagine this. We're a little country of Iceland with such diversity. My name is Ty Eriksson. As you can tell from my accent, I'm clearly not an Icelander. By heritage, I am. I'm a Western Icelander. Actually, my great-grandfather was born in the Westman Islands, and he was one of those that migrated to Utah. So culturally, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called Mormons. But today, I need to emphasize that the church does not take a position on circumcision. So I'm actually speaking now with my doctor hat on. I'm a board certified in 2 specialties, obstetrics and gynecology, and female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery, which is a long word for saying that I take care of all the awful things that happen to women. For example, I have been to Africa. I have taken care of women that have been genitally mutilated. I have seen the consequences of that awful, horrible thing. And I want to clearly emphasize that there is not, in fact, the World Health Organization states that we need to educate people that infant male circumcision is not in the same class, nor should be connected to female genital mutilation. The consequences of female genital mutilation invariably involves the removal of the clitoris, which is the sexual organ of the female, and that is clearly against any reasonable standards of human right and dignity. I wanted to just start out by reading a quote from a former member of the Utah Supreme Court, Dallin H. Oaks, on civility, because I think it's so important. A couple of weeks ago, I had the chance to be interviewed here in Iceland, and I was stunned when the next day there was all of this rancor and denigration against me as a human being, as a person. I don't know how they found things out and made this huge list of things attacking me as an individual. And so I thought, wow, why is there such animosity against individuals of different viewpoints? And he stated, on the subject of public discourse, we should all avoid contention. We should be examples of civility. We should love all people, be good listeners, and show concern for their sincere beliefs. Though we may disagree, we should not be disagreeable. Our stands and communications on controversial topics should not be contentious. We should be wise in explaining and pursuing our positions and in exercising our influence. In so doing, we may ask that others not be offended by our sincere beliefs. We should be persons of goodwill toward all, rejecting persecution of any kind, including persecution based on race, ethnicity, religious belief or unbelief, and differences in sexual orientation. So I was asked specifically, since a member of the World Health Organization could not be here, to review some of the experience that they have had in Sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the interesting points from that is over the last 10 years, there's been a great body of literature, medical science literature, that has been generated from those initiatives, including what we call randomized controlled trials. When we think about the medical literature, there's a hierarchy of the quality of medical evidence. A randomized controlled trial are 2 groups of individuals where the application of an event occurs in one, and the second is a placebo. Those are the highest forms of medical evidence. The lowest form of medical evidence are clinical case studies, personal life experience that an individual has. Unfortunately, most of what we hear in the media and the press are someone's personal life experience, but that should be taken from a medical perspective to be the lowest form of evidence. Within the context then of the World Health Organization, in 2007, they reported, and I quote, "The research evidence that male circumcision is efficacious in reducing sexual transmission of HIV from women to men is compelling. The partial protective effect of male circumcision is remarkably consistent across the observational studies," those are mid-level scientific evidence, and the 3 randomized controlled trials conducted in diverse settings. The 3 randomized controlled trials showed that male circumcision performed by well-trained medical professionals was safe and reduced the risk of acquiring HIV infection by approximately 60%. It is this body of literature that has helped cause organizations, for example, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatricians, to relook at their prior position statements which had been against circumcision, because there is some evidence that it may have a role and should be considered at least as we approach circumcision, whether it is voluntary in adults or in certain cases where it may be appropriate to be considered within an infant. So their recommendations: male circumcision should now be recognized as an efficacious intervention for HIV prevention. In Sub-Saharan Africa, 15 million individuals have been circumcised, and they estimate that the reduction in HIV rates will be over 500,000 individuals that will not be infected because of that medical intervention. Now, there's no question that places like Africa, where the prevalence rate ranges from 2 to 20%, is not Iceland, where the prevalence of HIV here is clearly less than 1%. In fact, I did a brief analysis, and it was 0.1%. But that does not mean, however, that the risks aren't here in this country. I don't speak Icelandic really well. Jeg talar bara smávæsi, svenska. So unfortunately, I had to get my medical science from the Iceland Monitor, and I apologize that the statistics that I'm going to be briefly quoting are probably not necessarily that reliable. But they reported in 2015 that there were 332 tests positive for HIV in this country between 1983 and 2015. 38% of those were heterosexual sex. So this is not simply a male sex male issue or an intravenous drug issue. This is endemic in the ability for this to be transmitted through normal heterosexual sex. 2 years later, last year, the same authoritative journal, the Iceland Monitor, reported that in 2016, 27 individuals were diagnosed with HIV, which is double from the years previously. So if you take a look at this ever-expanding concern from a health perspective, the country should be aware that this is something that is very real. Unfortunately, we can't do a survey to determine who has HIV, otherwise we would have to invasively draw blood from every person. So the published rates of what is known does not reflect what may be endemic inside of the population. So this is a real issue, and it must be considered by Parliament and others when they make decisions about the possibility of circumcising prior to age 15. What are the risks of circumcision? Well, I think some of that's been brought on. I just want to touch point a couple of issues. The overall median frequency is 1.5%, but as has been discussed, and this is really important, it depends on who performs it and at what age it's being performed. For example, we know that there was a good study that looked at if the circumcision is done before 14 days of age, the incidence of complications is 1%. Between 15 days and 2 months, it was 5%. If circumcision was performed between 1 month and 9 months, it's 10%, and adolescence, it's 20%. That's because as the child gets older, you have to intervene with general anesthetics or spinals. You have to intervene with suturing techniques, which is not required in infants. I personally, as part of my training, have performed circumcisions. I've done hundreds of circumcisions in infants. Never had to use suturing material because of the smallness of the skin that is removed and the techniques that are devised. Urologists who do it in older children usually need to use some other additional interventions to mitigate against blood loss that can occur. What about in the non-sterile environment? If you are doing a circumcision in a non-sterile environment, you have an 80% chance of infection. So clearly, doing it under sterile conditions. But does it always have to be a medical professional? Absolutely not. A very good study from Israel documented that circumcisions performed by both medically trained and non-medical personnel, but adequately trained, showed no difference in terms of complication rates on an extremely large series that was performed. What are some of the benefits? Now, again, the literature is all over the board here, and I could probably get into a debate with someone and we could spend literally hours. But let me just throw out some statistics, as I only have a few minutes. We can have a more robust conversation another time. 60% reduction in HIV, 67% reduction in penile cancer, 35% reduction in HPV. Now, it was mentioned that you could do a vaccination, but the efficacy versus effectiveness, it is very effective if you give it, but the acceptance by the general population is diminished. So it's not a panacea unless it was mandatory that all children received it. Urinary tract infection is reduced by 1,000% in the first year of life and 400% in the course of the lifetime. The average reduction is significant, which also includes reduction in pyelonephritis, reduction in imaging, spinal taps, and other complications that attend that. Drug-resistant bacteria has been documented in repetitive individuals or children of non-circumcision where they had resistance to medications because of the amount of times that they received it. So the question is, would this law allocate and allow for a circumcision if a child received an infection? Well, how many would it take? In other words, how do you parse this? It becomes very, very complicated when you look at that. There is a 10% reduction, 30% reduction in herpes, 60% reduction in fungal infections, 15 to 50% reduction in prostate cancer, and a 10% reduction in phimosis and other conditions. What about sexual impact? This is a common thing that's out there, and there's all kinds of anecdotal experience. Probably the best study that was done in Denmark. It was a systematic review of 38 studies, including 2 randomized controlled trials, looking at the outcome of sexual function in males before or after circumcision. The conclusion of this study, we don't have time to go through in detail, the hypothesis of inferior male sexual function following circumcision could not be supported by the findings of this systematic review. There's also a discussion frequently about first do no harm. I absolutely believe with first do no harm, but I think sometimes people will hijack that term and misdiscuss its actual meaning. First do no harm does not mean the first thing that I do to a patient shouldn't be harmful. It means that the balance of what I do, the risks and benefits, benefit if I'm going to do an invasive procedure. For example, a Harvard physician quoted this, and it's a good way to look at this. The idea that doctors should at the starting point not harm their patients is an appealing one. But if physicians took first do no harm literally, no one would ever have surgery, even if it was life-saving. We would stop ordering mammograms because they would lead to a biopsy of a non-cancerous growth. In fact, we might not even request blood tests, the pain, bruising, and bleeding required to draw blood, clearly avoidable harms. But doctors do recommend these things within the bounds of the ethical practice because the modern interpretation of first do no harm is closer to this. Doctors should help their patients as much as they can by recommending tests or treatments for which the potential benefit outweighs the risk of harms. Let's talk about immunizations briefly. I, last year, was invited to go to Zambia to do surgery there. I had been avoiding getting a yellow fever vaccine, and those of you that have had it know what I'm talking about. It is not a fun vaccine. But I was going to a high-risk place where that vaccine was now important. So I went through it, and I was in pain, and I was suffering because I was going from a low-risk environment to a high-risk environment. I want you to think about this clearly. In the families, culturally, where circumcision is an important part of their religious, the probability of a child at age 15 electing to have that procedure done is clearly going to be greater than 80%, right? So now you're taking this child from a low-risk situation, which is in Iceland, and that child is going to most likely and appropriately follow the religious tenets of their Muslim community or their Jewish faith and elect to have that done. So now you've moved that child to a very high-risk environment. One could argue that immunizing that child through a medical indicated circumcision early in life, medically indicated because it is a vaccination to avoid the possibility of severe complications when it's performed later. I mentioned that there is indeed over 20% chance of significant complications that can occur in a child or an adolescent that receives a circumcision. So if you're arguing that, well, you should ban all circumcision, that means that in those cultural communities where it is an important part of their culture, they're going to elect most likely to have that done. So now you are subjecting that child to a much higher risk of medical complications. Why not allow the parents, just as you would if they were making other decisions? For example, let's play sports. What if everyone from Iceland moved to a magical country where sports was outlawed? Because that country recognized that concussion head trauma, which occurs in thousands of youngsters from soccer, we call it in America, football here, that magical country decides, for the sake of children, we will not allow parents to let their children participate in sports, how would the Icelanders feel when they're going to the World Cup this summer? Cultural impact is a very, very important element to consider. In conclusion, I would like to talk just briefly about the law of unintended consequences. In the law of unintended consequences, we learn, and it was John Locke in 1691, that policy decision makers must consider what are the potential outcomes that can happen if they don't. Unfortunately, disasters can occur. And you can go all the way through the literature in many different countries where policy decision makers have made decisions because they're looking only at what their immediate desire is and not taking into consideration the long view. Ask yourself this question: if this is criminalized, as it is now written, what happens to the child when their parents are in jail? What happens to the child when they have to put on an airplane, take it to a country where they may not know the individuals and have the medical resources to have that procedure done? What about the child? What about the child who has that done and comes back into the country? And now the parents are afraid if their complication occurs, they're afraid to go to their healthcare provider because is the government now going to require that the healthcare provider must report that? So now the parents are worried that they're going to go to jail, and now the child is the one who suffers. Because the child is now going to have a delayed consequence, more increased risk of infection, more increased risk of concerns. What about that child? What about the individuals who have the circumcision outside? How are you going to have a monitoring system to determine who is circumcised? This is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but are we going to have a strip search program at the airport to examine every child 15 and under to come in so they can document the circumcision status of that child? And then every time a family that is of Icelandic origin goes on vacation and then comes back, are they going to be strip searched so that to determine whether or not circumcision has been done? What happens to the relationship between the child and his pediatrician or pediatric provider? These are the unintended consequences that must be in the conversation, as the government moves forward in what they do. And most importantly, and this is what I feel really strongly, we must be civil in how we do this. Because I guarantee you tomorrow, it's a good thing I don't speak Icelandic really well, because I would probably be hurt in my heart when I take a look at some of the comments that will show up on social media. Because I took a view that we should be looking carefully at the best interest of the child. And the best interest of the child includes a parent who loves and wants to shepherd that child through their life, and allowing that family unit to do things, including the immunization of their child, who at the time does not have a medical problem. But let immunization occur so when that child gets older, all of these consequences that we talked about, which don't show up at age 7 or 8 days of age, but may show up in the life of that child. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eriksson. And now I give the floor to Dr. Tumi Baldursson. He's the Chief Medical Doctor in Skin and Venereal Disease at the National Hospital in Reykjavik.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for inviting me to this conference. I will, in my lecture, bring you a little bit back to Iceland, sort of to see where we're at, basically. I called my colleague yesterday and tried to get a little bit of information on circumcision in Iceland. I'm a dermatologist, so I see a lot of patients with problems in their penises, dermatological problems, and I sent a couple of 3 patients of my 1,350 private patients a year. I send like 3, maybe 4 each year for circumcision. So there's a lot of circumcision going on in Iceland, believe me. Now, so I asked my colleague who has been a long time here if he had ever done a child or an early circumcision, and he had done that once. And he is a very successful urologist here. So I think that correctly reflects the amount of circumcisions that are done here. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to teach you a little bit about the physiology of circumcision. And I must apologize for the photos. They are all taken from the internet. Anyone can just Google circumcision and images, and these photos will come. So, but they can be maybe a bit offending. So please bear with me. But also, if you go into the kitchen, you have to stand the heat. And it was not I who started this. Now, the normal status of the skin of the glands. Let's see if I can get this here too. Yes. The normal status of the skin of the glands, which in Icelandic is called kongur, and the foreskin, it's the same skin as on the rest of the body. The corneal layer that is watertight and protects us is there, but because the skin is occluded by the foreskin, and this space is very wet, it's wet, there's urine there and or other substances. This is a challenge on the skin. Usually, as we Icelanders know, you can stay in the swimming pool for hours and hours, and you still get no complication of that. And so this most often goes very well, but not always. So the skin, the stratum corneum or the corneal layer, gives up, and it will not protect us. So what we're talking about, we have the penis here, and then we have a foreskin, and then we have a space between the glans, penis. No, sorry. Sorry. This did not change.
Soon.
Okay, so we have the foreskin here, and then we have the glands here, and then we have the space between, and so this is occluded. This is for the benefit of those who have not seen thousands of penises like I have. Now, the operation consists of removing the foreskin, leaving a little bit here to give a little space or relax. And this leaves the glans, or the kongurin, bare, so to speak. Page down. Yeah. No? So what should I do?
Sorry. Restart it.
There's a dissociation here. So, I try? Okay. Yeah. So, as you have gained knowledge of, circumcision is a pretty common procedure, and when any procedure becomes common, there will be a lot of instruments to do that procedure, and this one is one of them. You put a plastic thing here to pull the foreskin over, and then you put a suture around it, and then you cut around, leaving a little lax foreskin here. Most of it is gone. So this is a real procedure, and carries this 1% in very small penises, and a little bit more in a little bit older. And now we enter into my realm, sort of. So if the skin does not hold against the irritating factors beneath the foreskin, the living cells of the skin will respond with inflammation. Inflammation will lead to a faulty production of the corneal layer. The corneal layer will leak and is no longer protection against external factors. And this leads to a vicious circle of inflammation and defective production of corneal layer, which leads to a layer of surplus corneal layer, which becomes badly smelling, and we lovingly call forhúðarostur here in Iceland. Smegma is the international name. And the penis turns red. It's inflamed, the foreskin is inflamed, the patient is in pain, he cannot have sex, or if he has sex, he will have pain and bleed afterwards. And this is called balanitis, and this is treated with conservative measures, anti-inflammatory ointment and medicines. Ultimately, if nothing of this works, I send the patient to the urologist, and the urologist does a circumcision. Now, this is balanitis. Another one is the lichen sclerosis, where the foreskin turns into a scar. This is found in females in the genital area, and this carries a real risk of cancer. And there are many other, but the last one I take here is the phimosis, or the very tight foreskin, when you cannot retract the foreskin behind the glands. So these are the main reasons for the adult circumcision in Iceland. Now, the main reason for infant circumcision anywhere is, of course, preventive or religious, and T talked very well about that, and it's a tough act to follow, so I won't go into that too. So the health reasons for circumcision will be the balanitis, which you saw here, the lichen sclerosis, the scarring of the foreskin and of the penis, and the phimosis. Now, the thing is that, as T said, circumcision on adults and young adolescents is not an easy operation. It is seldom cosmetically rewarding, and it does carry a real risk of complication. However, the patients, when this is done for health reasons, are extremely thankful, because this sort of wipes away their problems, and they can start having some kind of sex life again. So whether we like it or not, the right to healthy sex should be, or maybe is, a human right, though it's hard to follow. But this is certainly a very troubling consequence to the patients if they cannot do that. Now, we have circumcised our patient, whether it be an infant or an adult, and what happens then? Well, what happens is the skin is exposed to the air and friction of everyday life. In the human, different from other mammals, it is the clothes that provide the friction, mostly. Now, this results in the thickening of the corneal layer. So the corneal layer of the skin becomes very much like the skin anywhere else on the body. And the disease, if that was the reason, is healed. So there's a lot of science written about the preventive effects of circumcision, and he talked about that here. In my work anyway, on HPV, it is more or less given that you have to have a defect in the stratum corneum to be able to get infected with the wart virus. The wart virus is the HPV, which we are vaccinating our females with. The girls are vaccinated against the HPV. So that's very nice, but anyway, you need a defect. So if you've got an intact, thick corneal layer, you have a protection there. Probably, I have not seen a study on that, I haven't looked for it either. This is the reason for the protection against HIV, even though there are other explanations for that. So I talked a little bit about how common circumcision was in Iceland. It's as common as anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere. Non-health related? No, it's very, very rare. So, will parents avoid non-health related circumcision? I think the last speaker covered that subject quite adequately. So, thank you for this small moment. Hope you have enjoyed it.
Thank you, Baldur, for your presentation. And now, Wes Robison, he is representing the Intact Iceland organization.
Hi. Good day. My name is Wes Robison, and I will be speaking on behalf of Intact Iceland. I am very happy to be able to attend today as a last-minute add-on to the list of speakers, so thank you for allowing me to attend. Intact Iceland is not affiliated with any political party or any religion or ethnic group. We have just one mission and one mission only, and that is to advocate for the right of children not to be subjected to non-therapeutic genital cutting. It's not about the parents' rights, it's about the child's rights. They are the ones that are going to have to live with the consequences for the rest of their life. We believe that we have a moral duty to speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves. We know that when parents choose to circumcise the child, it is because they love them, and they want the very best for them. Unfortunately, the child does not feel its parents' love during the circumcision and is left with a painful healing process that it cannot understand or express itself about. There are many ways to circumcise. There are many ways to circumcise an infant boy, but no matter what method is used, the steps are as follows. Step 1, possibly, but not necessarily, the administration of anesthesia. For example, a cloth dipped in wine or sugary beverage that the infant can suck on. Step 2, possibly an application of antiseptic agent. Step 3, the separation of the foreskin from the glands. On smaller children, the foreskin is fused to the glands of the penis, pretty much in the same way that a fingernail is fused to a finger. In order to circumcise a baby boy, the foreskin has to be forcibly separated from the glans penis by inserting a blunt probe under the foreskin, and then it's swept around the glans in full circles, pretty much like someone showing a blunt instrument under your fingernail and running it back and forth and back until your nail pops off. One can only imagine how excruciatingly painful that must be, especially for a little baby. Fourth step is the clamping or crushing of the tissue to stop the blood flow. Step 5, cutting off the clamping of the I should have printed out the I should have had the speech printed out. Sorry. Sorry about that. It's all right, and here we go. So, step 5, cutting off clamping of the foreskin, also called amputation of the foreskin. When the skin has been cut, clamped off, it exposes the glands that otherwise would be protected from friction and bacteria. Step 6, possibly rinsing the wound in alcohol. Step 7, wound dressing. Step 8, healing process. According to a Danish circumcision clinic, it can take up to 6 weeks for the wound to heal completely, and the final result can be seen. Many think that circumcision is a minor and insignificant procedure, provided that anesthesia is used, and some even claim that the boys sleep during the circumcision because the pain management is so good. That is not possible unless one does a general anesthesia that is very dangerous for children under 2 months old, and doctors try to avoid for children under 6 months old. Even the dorsal penile nerve block, that is considered the best commonly available method of pain management, leaves the underside of the penis receptive to pain. When people think the babies are asleep, it is actually a state of shock the child can go into as a way to escape the overwhelming pain. As recently as 1999, it was common for people to claim babies could not feel pain until they were a year old. We of course know better than that today. Other painkillers children are given are wine, lollipop, sugar water, or other sugary beverage to take the pain away. Would you think that one of those things were enough for you to receive as a pain management before you got your nail ripped off? You, as an adult with cognitive abilities the infant does not have, would at least know what was happening. The little baby has no idea and has no way of expressing the fear that it is experiencing. Babies, and especially babies born before time, feel more intense pain than adults. When an infant or child is subjected to circumcision without his consent, it is not only a part of his body that is taken from him. The right to choose is taken from him also. A child whose genitals are left intact can always choose to undergo circumcision for religious or any other reason when he is mature enough to make his own decision about his body. But an infant or child who has been subjected to circumcision can never undo what has been done to him. Not only are you taking a healthy body part away, but with every surgery there is a risk. And there have been many cases of babies having been penis amputated during the circumcision. The initial firm behind the popular circumcision tool, Clamp, lost lawsuits in relation to circumcision that went wrong and has since gone out of business in the US and in 2000, the US Food and Drug Administration issued a public health notice about the Clamp and Gomco clamps after receiving about 20 injury reports a year since 1996, including lacerations, hemorrhaging, penile amputation, and urethral damage. Still, the Clamp is used today. When there is much disagreement regarding the potential benefits and harms of circumcision, isn't it best that the choice be left to the individual himself when he is old enough to exercise informed consent? We want to emphasize that we are not opposed to circumcision when the owner of the penis himself has consented to the surgery, nor do we oppose circumcision when it's performed for a valid medical reason. Why then, it may be asked, do we oppose non-therapeutic circumcision while not opposing medically indicated circumcision? The answer is that surgery to correct pathological condition is valid when conservative measures have failed and the efficacy of the surgery to correct the condition has been adequately demonstrated. But to perform a surgery in the absence of a pathological condition violates one of the cardinal precepts of medical ethics. First, do no harm. Or to put that in plain English, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Surgery is never without risk, and amputations of a body part necessarily entails loss of all of the functions and sensations of that body part. It also can severely and irreparably impair the man's body image. Even when a circumcision is performed flawlessly, if there was no pathological condition in the first place, the circumcision is a harm in and of itself. just as any other unnecessary surgery or amputation would be. It has been claimed that a minimum age for circumcision, barring the involuntary circumcision of minors, would constitute a de facto ban on Jews on Muslims Iceland. That is simply not true. We welcome them with open arms, but we believe that children's rights must take precedence. In fact, there is a group called Jews Against Circumcision that agrees with us on this and has endorsed the proposed involuntary circumcision ban. They sent a letter to Alþingi in which they stated, among other things, that, begin quote, "We reject the proposition that involuntary circumcision is a necessary part of being Jewish. It isn't. A Jewish girl is no less Jewish than her brother. And a Jewish boy born to a Jewish mother is no less Jewish by virtue of not having had part of his penis cut off. Jewishness is a product of one's genes, one's heritage, one's family life and upbringing, one's values, one's traditions and culture, and in the case of Judaism, it's a product of one's religious beliefs." Quote ends. No one is proposing to prevent parents from bringing up their children as they see fit and raising them with their own religion, values, traditions, and culture, but freedom of religion cannot supplant the rule of law, and it cannot supersede fundamental principles and norms regarding basic human rights. As Jews Against Circumcision has stated, we believe that one person's right to practice his or her own religion ends where another person's body begins. We believe that one person's right to practice one's religion ends where another person's body begins. We believe that one person's fundamental right of religious liberty is delimited by every other person, even more fundamental right not to be physically harmed. We believe that the only person who has a right to cause to have his or her genitals or any other body part mutilated, deformed, scarred, or surgically altered in any way is the individual himself or herself. No one else has a right to decide what parts of a boy's penis he gets to keep and what parts to cut off. We do not consider that a radical or even a controversial position, much less an anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim one. On the contrary, we consider it to be simply in accordance with contemporary norms regarding fundamental human rights and human dignity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sveinn. And now I welcome Professor Dr. Bernard Lobel. He's a urologist and a former chief doctor at the Hospital of Rennes in France.
Finally, the urologist comes. I would like to ask to the member of Parliament of Iceland not to ban circumcision. Why? So many countries by the past, through the century, tried to ban circumcision, and circumcision remains. I would say that the last one was the Soviet Union. We spoke about it, and we know that the Soviet Union collapsed and the circumcision remained. So I understand the fears your previous speaker spoke about. That's not the reality. And you understood, first of all, what was circumcision. We have seen that perfectly. And the second point, we have understood how much it's important for the religious people. So I would like to emphasize about 2 points. First of all, is circumcision a mutilation? And I have many argumentations. It's not a mutilation. To remove a small part of skin and mucosa in excess is not a mutilation. And the first argument is a statistical argument. If you follow the World Health Organization, they claim that all over the world, more than 700 million males are circumcised. Are they mutilated? In the States, 50 to 60% of American males are circumcised. In Israel, 98% of the male population is circumcised. They are not mutilated. The second argument is the argument of a urologist. As a urologist, I had to perform some circumcision in adult. And in adult, when you do that, you don't have the feeling to mutilate the patient. But, in the contrary, when you have a penile cancer, you have to remove the glands. This is a terrible, awful mutilation. So the third argument is a surgical argument. Some men are born with a small penis, which is called micropenis. It's stable, it's less than 5 centimeters in erection in adult. And it's a possibility now to reconstruct the penis. So if you want to reconstruct the penis, it's a difficult operation. It takes 8 hours, but it's a possibility. So you can take a graft of skin on the arm with the vessel and the nerves, and you reconstruct the penis. Even the glands. The aesthetical aspect is perfect, but it's not functional, sexually speaking, because it's like skin. It has no feeling. If you want to keep the special sensitivity of the penis, you have to keep the micropenis. And the glands of the micropenis comes at the root of the new reconstructed penis. Moreover, and that's the last argument, the Danish Pediatrician Association said a few years ago that when you perform a circumcision for therapeutic reason, it's not a mutilation. But if you do it for a religious purpose, that's become a mutilation. As a surgeon, I knew that when I cut an arm or a leg, whatever is the reason, it's a real mutilation. The second point is, does circumcision change sexuality? So it's a difficult point, because if you do circumcision in childhood, it's difficult to know if it was different before and after. But you can have the trial on adult. And when you speak with the adults before and after the circumcision, you can see that it's not different. Yeah, the sensitivity is different, but the quality is the same. But you have to wait a little bit, because in adult, after the circumcision, the trouble is for a long time, which means many months. And that's an advice I give to Mrs. Nordel and Mr. Gunnarsson. If they have a child to be circumcised, it's better to do it in childhood than in adult, because in adult, it's much more traumatic. So, we have seen that circumcision has advantages and disadvantages. Advantages we have seen already, that's in terms of decreasing the risk for, partially decreasing the risk of AIDS and STD. It's more hygienic, we have seen all the reasons. But disadvantages are very low. It's a low-risk operation. So finally, in conclusion, I would say that I agree that it's a fight in between the right for the people to have their own religion, the right for the parents to raise the children as they want, and the necessity to protect the physical integrity of childhood. But, in conclusion, what I would say, don't ban the circumcision. Why? Because if you ban it, you will push the circumcision into clandestinity. And if you push into clandestinity, it's not the best way to protect physical integrity of the children. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lobel. And so next we'll be hearing from Father Heikki Huttunen, the General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be able to speak to this audience, and it's a rare occasion to hear such a rich variety of views on such a topical issue. Our organization, somebody might ask, why are the churches involved in this discussion? Well, we were actually contacted by the Conference of European Rabbis with the question about this issue as it was discussed in Iceland, how to handle with it, and would we have an international aspect to bring into this. And so, in fact, the Conference of European Churches and our colleagues in the Catholic Church, which is the Council of Bishops' Conferences in Europe, we issued a statement which you may have seen on this question. And we were able to then also include a statement by our Jewish partners and our Muslim partners in that statement. And then we were able to be connected with the Interreligious Forum here in Iceland at the university and the parliamentarians, and we're very happy that you wanted to host such an interesting forum on this issue today. The point of view of an ecumenical organization like mine to this discussion is the point of view of freedom of religion or belief in the context of human rights. And when we as churches speak of the freedom of religion or belief, we speak of it for all. We're not only interested in the rights of Christians, we're interested in a society which is receptive and respective of human rights in its own context and more importantly in the global context. As you see, an issue which is discussed in Iceland suddenly interests so many people from different parts of Europe and even other parts of the world. And I should add here, as a representative of churches, that there are church traditions where circumcision is practiced. Not on the same level of religious necessity, but as a very respected tradition, and that is the Ethiopian and Eritrean traditions. And I think those two are already represented also in Iceland. So it is a very interesting, multifaceted issue. And as I said, it's very useful and beneficial that we can discuss in a context of multi-stakeholders where we hear the different views on this matter. And when we think from the ecumenical point of view, we are thinking of the relations between majorities and minorities, historical majorities, new minorities, historical minorities, what is the religious fabric of our countries, what is the religious fabric of Europe, and indeed of the whole world. And what is the place of religion in a modern society, the so-called religion in the public sphere? What is the role of my religious or cultural or ethnic identity within the fabric of a multicultural society? Am I welcome with my identity? Is my religious or ethnic identity welcome in the whole of our societies? And of course, when we think of these issues, we cannot avoid the reality of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Europe, which are real phenomena and very painful realities. For example, in the city of Brussels, where we are based, it is a daily question. What is the security of the Jewish institutions in that city, for example? Very much. I walk past a synagogue which is very heavily guarded every day. And so the question needs to be part of your discussion. How would an Icelandic ban on circumcision, what kind of a role would it play in the European context? How would it possibly be used in ways that you don't expect or wish for it to be used? How would a populist or an extremist interpretation of the decision be? We're also faced with the I hope not polarization of traditional approaches or religious approaches against modernist approaches, a secular approach and a church approach or a religious institutional approach. I hope that we can keep this discussion going and that we can respectfully hear each other, not only listen but also hear each other and try to at least respect each other's views and hopefully also understand and avoid at all cost the differentiation of our discussions and the lack of communication between our communities. I think with the approach, if we take a global view on these questions, we need to be able to find an approach which takes into account both the millennial practices and their values, the value of religious and other identities, and how do they play together in a postmodern situation. In a postmodern society, we have several identities. We don't only have one identity. We don't only have one set of values. We have several sets of values, and we need those sets of values to communicate with each other, and we need to find a way for these to live together. So these are the views from an ecumenical and international church perspective, which we would like to bring into this discussion so that we can make our decision on this issue and several other medical, ethical, traditional identity issues in the future, in a way where we will be able to keep our different sets of values in conversation with each other and in an interplay with each other. And I would like to invite my colleague Elisabetta from our organization to look at this issue a little bit more from a human rights perspective, if the moderator allows.
Thank you. I'm Elisabetta Kitanovic, and I work as human rights advocate for the Conference of European Churches. And we have been discussing this issue recently, but also a long time ago, especially with Rabbi Moshe Levine in the Council of Europe. Like a few years back, we had the same discussion, and we used basically the same argumentation, but let's look at it again. The Conference of European Churches, together with the Council of European Bishop Conferences of Europe, in their statement of 15 of March 2018, expressed their public opinion on the circumcision of male boys following the new draft law of Iceland in order to ban circumcision of male children and FGM. In Iceland, the draft law suggests that the parents could face up to 6 years in prison for anyone causing damage to the body or health of a child by removing sexual organs in whole or in part. Now, the question is what we are talking about here. On the one hand, we have the clash of rights between freedom of religion or belief of Article 10 of European Charter of Fundamental Rights, the right to education, Article 14, the Article 3, right to integrity of the person, and Article 1, the right to have human dignity. And let's see a little bit what this argumentation in the article says. For the Article 10, freedom of thought, consciousness, and religion, it says that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, consciousness, and religion, and among the rest, to manifest religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Article 14, right to education, it says, among others, that there is right of parents to ensure the education and teaching of the children in conformity with their religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions. Article 3, right to integrity of the person, says that everyone has the right to respect for his or her physical and mental integrity. And Article 1, which we need to bring into discussion, it's the right to have human dignity, because human dignity is inviolable, and it must be respected and protected. It is important here that we actually balance these rights, and that we avoid clash of this fundamental right, because it is important that we harmonize these rights in order to protect the human dignity and to preserve religious identity of every individual and the community. There is no hierarchy of rights. One right is not more important than the other. Rights of child, it's not more important than freedom of religion or belief, and freedom of religion or belief, it's not more important than the rights of the child. So what does it mean? We need to harmonize and we need to bring them together, and the question is how. We have learned in this seminar about circumcision, and let us see more about religious freedom and the right of religious minorities in Europe, because by this draft law, the rights of religious minorities, it is at stake in Europe. For the Conference of European Churches, it was always clear that the religious freedom is fundamental right for every person living on the earth, recognizing at the same time forum internum, what means privately, and forum externum in public within the religious freedom principle. That means that whether as an individual or in the community, this right is exercised and guaranteed by international human rights law. Freedom of religion or belief is there for everybody, for all, not for majority. It is there for believers and non-believers. And let us see a little bit the legal framework of the European Union and the Council of Europe, as Iceland has a special agreement in the European Economic Area with the European Union, and it is a member of the Council of Europe, United Nations, and the OSCE, what means that it is legally obliged to fulfill the universal human rights standards. The EU Lisbon Treaty underlines that the inspiration for the European Union is driven from the cultural, religious, and humanist inheritance of Europe. In Article 10 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, it is stipulated that in defining and implementing its policies, the European Union will combat discrimination based on religion or belief. In Article 10, and this is very important of the Lisbon Treaty, there is right to respect for religious rights and cultural traditions. It's deeply underlined. And the Council of Europe had this discussion, as I mentioned before, in 2015, that Rabbi Moshe quoted here. I will just remind that there is a very good outcome of the Council of Europe Resolution 2076, 2015, called Freedom of Religion or Belief and Living Together in Democratic Societies. And its Article 9, it says that as far as circumcision of young boys is concerned, that Assembly refers to its Resolution 1952, 2013 on children's rights to physical integrity, and out of a concern to protect children's rights, which the Jewish and Muslim communities surely share, recommends that the member states provide for ritual circumcision of children not to be allowed unless practiced by a person with the requisite training and skill in appropriate medical and health conditions. In this regard, a state like Iceland, instead of banning circumcision, the solution should look more in legally defining the medical, sanitary, and other conditions for circumcision to be practiced in Iceland, and take into account public opinion of the parties concerned and expressed in this seminar today. Also, we can refer to the study of American Academy of Pediatricians, which was already mentioned, that was found that the health benefits of newborn male circumcision outweighs the risks, but the benefits are not great enough to recommend universal newborn circumcision. Now, if the boy is not circumcised, he cannot become a member of the Jewish or Muslim community because this act is compulsory to form its religious identity. There are a few points on this matter that I would like to bring to the table, and that is the situation of the rights of religious minorities in Europe. The Legal Act of Iceland raises also the issue of the treatment of the rights of religious minorities in Europe. The Conference of European Churches would like to indicate the importance of the European states to do everything in their power in order to help the preservation of the cultural and religious identity of minorities due to the importance of peaceful and stable coexistence of people living together in Europe. The rights of protection of religious and ethnic minorities needs to be a priority on the agenda of European states, and also it can be a good way to strengthen the human rights principles of the protection of human dignity of every individual, equality and non-discrimination. Benefits are not limited to minorities, since this protection will bring stability, economic development and prosperity to all. Implementation of the right to contribute to the integration process in the society in order to avoid assimilation of the religious communities into the standard cultural setting of majority, as they have the right to preserve and develop their own religious identity. This is why it is important to check good practices in other countries and see how other countries like Germany accommodated religious rituals in their legal system in order to meet the needs of their constituency and promote multiculturalism and solidarity. Jewish and Muslim community have the right to safeguard their own religious identity, as well as to promote and protect their own identity and participate in the cultural and social life as anyone else, and that is an added value for European pluralistic society. Also, it is important to say that the state needs to avoid such policies which contribute to the assimilation of religious and ethnic minorities. Therefore, it is important that the state accommodate religious beliefs into the public sphere by implementing the right to freedom of religion or belief in relationship to healthcare, education, and civil service. It is also important to notice that such act as the draft law of Iceland raises the issue of racism, xenophobia, religious hatred, keeping in mind that these phenomena are often directed against migrant communities. Iceland is not a member of the European Union, but it has an agreement with the European Economic Area, and it is a good partner of the European Union, and it would be therefore very important that as a non-EU member state to move forward to the acceptance of the above principles and values. In Germany in 2013, the Bundestag, German's parliament, passed a law allowing the religious procedure. According to the new rules, especially qualified members of the religious communities can perform the operation in the first 6 months of the boy's life, after which it must be performed by a physician. As the question of the religious minorities is important for the Conference of European Churches, we have organized in 2016 conference in Zagreb, where we have asked Council of Europe member states as well as the EU member states to produce a report about the state of the rights of minorities, also implementing all pertinent legislation protecting the status of the rights of minorities, ensuring conditions to enable individuals and groups to coexist in diversity and creating a positive climate for the expression of pluralism, tolerance, and respect as a cornerstone of democratic societies, as well as promoting ongoing dialogue between majorities and minorities so as to form a common basis of ideals and values of convivence in the pluralistic and democratic societies. We are happy to help to Iceland in terms of looking into the standards of freedom of religion or belief. And for this purpose, the Conference of European Churches has a document which is called Minimum Standards on Freedom of Religion or Belief, where we have minimum standards that every state needs to fulfill in terms of freedom of religion or belief, because where there is a freedom, there is also a responsibility. We are absolutely aware of that. And we are happy to share this document with you. And in this regard, I would like to express solidarity with our Jewish and Muslim friends and to stand for their right that they practice freedom of religion or belief freely. As we are aware that there is a rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Europe, for that purpose, we have prepared for this summer a program of the summer school on human rights for theologians, where we are training theologians in human rights issues, and we are trying to bring theology and human rights law together. And that is not an easy issue, because we would like to bring our contribution to decrease anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Europe. Thank you.
Now, Monsignore Duarte da Cunha should be among us to present the point of view of the Council of Bishops' Conferences of Europe, but he couldn't make it. He missed his plane connection. So I will ask a representative from the Catholic Church now to read a few sentences from the letter of Monsignore da Cunha. Please, Unnur Gunnarsdottir from the Bishop's Office here in Reykjavik.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to assure the support of the European Catholic Church to your initiative, as the CCEE said on its common declaration together with the CEC. It's with great concern that we take note of a proposal tabled in the Icelandic Parliament, Alþingi, to ban non-medically indicated circumcision of male children. If the proposal were made into law, it would not only amount to be an infringement of the fundamental human right of freedom of religion or belief, but would also be perceived as a signal that people with Jewish or Muslim backgrounds are no longer welcome to Iceland. The Catholic Church is particularly committed to defending the child's right, which also indicates the right to duty of the family to educate their children according to their own religious convictions. This initiative is against religious freedom and the principles of democracy proper to a civil society. We need a background of freedom and peaceful dialogue so that people with religious beliefs can be integrated in society and all the richness of humanity and culture be welcomed. It is unacceptable that something that belongs to a religious tradition should be prohibited just for ideological reasons. This seminar is a sign that we are united in the defense of all these values and that together we will not accept an attack of any religion tradition that would make it impossible for a certain religion to live in freedom or to any intent that would eventually change human values such as life, family, and liberty. I hope that this conference will be well understood as a sign that religious, even that we have our own traditions, and even if we disagree in several aspects of our faith, are engaged in the defense of freedom for all, since we believe this is the only way to build peace and support a human integral development. Yours sincerely, Father Duarte da Cunha. Thank you.
Now it's time for our second break, but since it's almost 4:30 already and we only have until 5, and I see at least 3 names on the list here, I suggest that we take only a 5 minutes break this time. So 4 people have entered their names on the speakers list, and so I'll just call them up. And the first one is Evan Roman.
Do I come up here? Thank you for having me today. I'll wait for him. I am from the United States. I'm from a Jewish family. I was raised Jewish. And I'm here today to support the bill. I have seen friends, colleagues, people I've known. I've heard so many stories as an activist against circumcision in the United States, where it's very common. stories of lifelong pain, lifelong depression, suicide, lifelong loss of sexual function due to circumcision that they did not consent to as a child. I believe that forced body modifications are for consenting adults only. I am very thankful to be here and be allowed to speak. Iceland is looked up to by the whole world as a country that represents the top of human rights and democracy. It leads the world in this, and the rest of the world is watching you today. And my question for the members of the Althingi and for the people here today who spoke, what do you say to the people like me who feel violated by circumcision done to them as a child? What do you say to them? Thank you very much.
I think it's maybe best that we have all the speakers come up and present their questions, and then we, all those who want to answer can then give their answers to the questions. The next on the list is Imam Yahya Sergio Yahya Pallavicini. Pallavicini. You don't see him? Okay. Yeah. So he's not here. Okay. Yeah. I think we'll first take the questions. There are only 4 people on the list. So, and then you will be allowed to answer. Those of you who want to answer the questions, then you'll do so. Jón Valur Jensson is the next one on the list.
Thank you, and thank you everybody here. This is a very welcome initiative of yours to have this conference here, and I'm mostly very pleased with it. My intelligence is really indeed not that good that I catch and comprehend every spoken sentence, but those views have been objectively set forth, and very good that those different views are in a debate in this matter. And I especially appreciate Dr. Eriksson's contribution here, very informative, and Rabbi Steyer of Stockholm, of American descent too. She had very good points too about those presumed deaths due to male circumcision. Those have been it has been asserted here in Iceland that there are hundreds of deaths, even in North America, every year due to this. And when it came to it, there was somebody there who claimed there were 170 every year. He is not presenting his sources really, and those neonatal deaths in the first maybe 3 or 4 weeks from birth, those can be of so many causes. In a nation of 350 million, it is only to be expected that there are many neonatal deaths. And those which are belonging to this maybe 51% of the population of the male births which are circumcised, they are not just to be given it is not to be granted that those are all due to the circumcision. There are so many other complications that may occur after birth. And well, I am a Catholic theologian, and I just wish to testify to my church's, from the beginning, opposition against this ban that is proposed here in Iceland in the parliament. And this ban is not in accordance with the New Testament. They abandoned circumcision, the Christians, that is true, but they did never condemn circumcision for those Jews who are convinced that they are bound by their pact with God, that Abrahamic pact with God, that this is, I would say, from a Catholic viewpoint, this is their moral duty to preserve circumcision because this is part of their religion, while they maintain that belief, while they have not adopted the Christian view that Christ, with his sacrifice, has abandoned, in a way, abandoned the need for any sacrifices, other sacrifices as the Jews had in their temple, and even circumcision as a presumed pact with God. But, you know, why do I say this? This is anti-Christian. Because, I'll finish soon. Oh, yes. I would say those who, presumably Christians, who are maintaining that this is an anti-Christian behavior to circumcise because it goes against the welfare of the kids, I would say, point to the Holy Family. Mary and Joseph, and even the parents too of St. John the Baptist, they both, those parents were in the New Testament said to be individuals of justice and piety, obeying God's will and commands. How can Christians, reading that in the New Testament, then condemn the Jewish custom of circumcision of boys? By such an attitude, aren't they really, those advocates of a ban of circumcision, aren't they really implicitly condemning the Holy Family, condemning the parents of St. John the Baptist? I can't see any other view as available here. And this is against all Christian doctrine, I would say, from the beginning, to condemn the parents of Jesus, the parents of St. John the Baptist, on such weak grounds, and they, if those who follow this so-called ban on circumcision, this bill, I mean, so-called bill, last sentence of mine, they are saying that they are for the deprivation of Jesus and St. John the Baptist of their parents for up to 6 years. They should think of that. Thank you.
Okay. And the last one on the speakers list is Mansour Ahmad Malik.
All right. Hi. I've already been introduced. Well, first of all, thank you for the organizers, especially the speakers who came from all the way from wherever they came from, and from a personal perspective, supporting me as a Muslim, which has been a little bit frustrating, so to say, since this bill or since this discussion on this bill has been brought into place. There are a limited number of Muslims, a limited number of Jewish members here, so I appreciate you greatly. But there's one thing which I haven't heard any of the doctors mention it, and least of all, I haven't heard any of the members of Parliament ever mention it. The oath that we refer to as a doctor, we keep saying do no harm, but also included in this, it says I shall prevent disease wherever I can, because that's preferable to cure. So putting both into balance, as a doctor, it's a responsibility of a doctor not just to not do any harm, but from a human perspective, or from the oath that they have taken, it's to prevent disease wherever they can, whether it's at childhood, knowing whatever the doctors have just now explained to us, the downsides of disease, of not being circumcised. Now, secondly, the facts about death. I've been in a discussion with members of Parliament, and very honestly, it's been very disappointing, especially from the leading figure of this bill. I've received a few comments or a few replies to my emails to them. I had written a couple of articles and sent them to all the members of Parliament. Very much like our guest Ute has described. I went through all of these references with my wife. Either they were not traceable, there was nothing to them, and most importantly, most of them, It indicated even in the titles that this was not a procedure done by a specialist in circumcision. So again, facts have to be presented as facts. One last question. It's great to see other members here, maybe in opposition, maybe in favor, but most importantly for me, apart from the gentleman, Mr. Gunnarsson, I don't see any other member of parliament who is actually proposing this bill, who's actually discussing this bill, and who will actually be implementing this bill or not, which again, it means a lot to me, or it would mean a lot to me if we continue this discussion, whether now, whether later, whenever, to actually be in contact and actually be able to speak to those people who want to present this, who want to implement this, this bill. So my question just to the parliament members is, first of all, if the medical data and the medical facts are not either completely in favor of the bill that you're presenting, if there is a division in medical facts, which there clearly is, and in my opinion, it's clearly weighing towards the benefits of circumcision, especially at a young age, how is it possible that you can propose or even think about implementing a bill which there's a division on medically? And secondly, my question just to the members of parliament, where are the other members of parliament? Thank you very much.
Okay. We have only 10 minutes left, so I will give you a chance to respond. I think at least 2 of the questions were mainly directed against the Icelandic representatives. Virkar þetta?
Okay, can you, yes, I'm sure you can all hear me. First of all, I would like to thank all of the presenters for very frank discussions, very enlightening comments and talks. And in spite of what you may think, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to have the chance to have this opportunity to talk to you, because any discussion, any change in society, anything that we do in society, especially in a democratic society like Iceland, starts with a discussion. And I believe that's what we're doing today. Now, there were a couple of questions. Let me first start with Mansour. Yes? Yep. You asked where are the other members of parliament. Now, some of them were here earlier. However, you may not know, and you probably don't know, that when this conference was decided upon, today was supposed to be a normal day in Parliament. However, a couple of weeks ago, the President of Parliament, for various reasons, decided to switch the schedule of the Parliament, so today is committee day. And as a member of Parliament, you're supposed to be in your committee when the committee is debating issues and so on and so forth. That's the main reason that the other members are not here. And I'm actually skipping class by being here. But I'm happy with that. That's, I don't have a problem. You won't tell anyone. No, thank you. Thank you. Now, on the physician's oath, or actually a healthcare professional's oath, the first do no harm. Now, you can understand that in many various ways, and you can choose to take it as a very narrow argument or a wide argument. Personally, what I just don't seem to get over the hump of doing a procedure or doing any kind of a medical procedure or whatever you want to call it on a patient without having a medical indication. That's basically where I'm at. And just like some of the speakers today spoke, it's difficult to get over the hump that this is a part of our religion. And I fully respect that. I fully respect that. Now, that's basically where I'm at. And there are also, I mean, there are many ways to look at it, but I think I'll leave it at that. The other thing with that is that the difficulty with balancing the issue of human rights and children's rights against religious rights. I mean, those will always be, I don't want to say in conflict, but there will always be a balance between the two. And all of our societies, and I've discussed it with many of our speakers today, all of our societies have changed. Back in the Middle Ages, we were burning witches on stakes. We don't do that anymore. And back in the early 1900s, women weren't allowed to vote. They are today. We have in the room our first female bishop of Iceland, for example, and so on and so forth. So societal norms change, cultural norms change, and even religious norms change. And I think that's healthy. I think that's healthy for the societies in which these religions thrive. And I think it's important both for the religion and for society. It's important for both. Because a religion that comes to, let's say, practice in a society has to want to be a part of that society, I guess. And society has to be able to fathom the religion or be able to embrace it. So it's a two-way street. It's always a two-way street. And so society changes, and so do we. Evan, is it Romain? Yeah. You asked what I say to children who've been violated as children, as you put it. Your words, not mine. I really don't know what to say. I mean, it's obviously something you carry through life. I hope it doesn't affect your life tremendously, obviously. And I hope when and if you have children yourself, you will allow those children to make decisions themselves. That's about all I can say for that. Thank you.
So now we only have 4 minutes left, but I see a hand here, so go ahead.
May I give an answer to this young American boy who complained about his penis after circumcision? You know, penis for man, even for man, is an important organ. Penis is an important organ, and it's normal that many men are complaining about the penis. Most of them are not circumcised, and they claim they have problem with their penis. I would say they have erectile dysfunction, they have disorder of the penis, they have chronic pelvic pain, and some of them are with circumcision. Most of those people do not complain about the circumcision as the cause of their problem. But some can do. And even that, we have to treat all the patients and to help them. But it's for sure, I understand that you are suffering a lot about your penis, but you are not the only one. I told you that many men are suffering from the penis because it's not exactly the penis they want. And it's not because of the circumcision, it's because of the importance of the organ, like the heart, the stomach, or whatever.
well, I see two hands, but we have already... Nee, okay. So, yeah.
Thank you again for giving me a second chance to speak. I know my voice here is quite different from most of the voices you've heard today. And when I'm talking about people who feel harmed by circumcision done to them as a child, I'm talking, and as he said, people do not attribute the problems they have to circumcision, because when they're a child and they're circumcised as an infant, a lot of the complications they do not know are caused by circumcision. They just think this is normal, how my body is, especially like in a country like the United States, where people do not see each other naked. I know in Finland, we all go to sauna. I live in Estonia. We go to sauna, we see each other naked. You see your family naked. And people understand their bodies a little bit better with more open cultures like that. But in the US, a lot of people I know, growing up, when you talk about masturbation, like, oh, it bleeds every time. Because the skin is so tight, and they remove so much skin, that the skin tears. Or erections were really painful, because the skin is tight and cannot accommodate the penis when it is fully erect. Now, they don't know that this was caused by circumcision. They just think this is normal. And when I was 16, I, was growing up in the United States. You don't see each other naked. Whatever my penis looked like was normal. And then when I was 16, I did some research. What is circumcision? What is the foreskin? And I'm like, so that's what a penis naturally looks like. That's what's supposed to be there. That makes sense. And the idea of removing it did not make sense. So as far as, why do I feel so violated and damaged? I don't have any of the complications I mentioned, like extremely tight skin or bleeding. But I know I've met people with these problems, many people with these problems, and they never understood why. I do have painful urination sometimes because of meatal stenosis, which occurs very commonly when you circumcise infants. Now, this is just seen as normal because it's, the urethra shrinks when you circumcise someone as an infant. The urethral opening gets smaller. It's called meatal stenosis. And normally it's not treated because they still can urinate, but they never attribute this, that this is a problem or this is not abnormal. But as far as why I feel so violated by this and why so many people I know feel so violated by this, the foreskin is a very important sexual organ. It's a part of the penis. There's not a certain line of how much of the penis you can cut off. There's this amount of the penis can be removed. How much of your genitals now, whether you're circumcised, a man or a woman, how many of your part of your penis or of your vulva can be removed without it affecting sex? I'm probably thinking, most of you think, well, if you removed any of this tissue, I would have less sensation. There would be less there. This would be problematic if tissue from my genitals were removed right now. And this doesn't change when you do it to an infant. When you do it to an infant, they just don't know because they never had the opportunity to have their whole body. And that feeling of not ever having the opportunity to have my whole body makes me feel very, very violated. And I am not alone.
There was one hand in the air before 5, so I'll give the microphone to you before the end.
I just want to say very briefly to the speaker we've just heard, I'm really sorry you feel like you do. I've lived in the Jewish community all my life. I'm 63. I have to say I've never met, ever met, any Jewish male who feels like that. So I'll accept that your feelings are genuine. And I'm the president of the British Jewish community, so any complaints would come to me. And I've been a vice president and a president for 9 years. And I've searched in vain for anyone in Britain who feels like you. So I find I'm skeptical to say that many people feel like that. And I'm sorry you do. But what I really wanted to say to Dr. Gunnarsson was something he just said troubled me deeply. He said a person of faith lives in a society and it's a two-way traffic. He's got to understand how society is. Dr. Gunnarsson, I hope you're not saying that this society is unwelcome to Jews and that Jews should feel unwelcome because there's a view expressed in society against circumcision. That's a very, very illiberal thing to say. I hope that a Western democratic liberal society is able to accommodate different views without a Jewish person in Iceland feeling that somehow he's swimming against the tide of society, because that's a very, very dangerous slippery slope.
Okay. There was one hand in the air before 5 o'clock, so I'll give the mic to Salver, but then we really have to end.
I'm sorry, because I was sort of looking forward to some discussion after all the talks. I just wanted to say that I think this conference has been very enlightening. It's been really, really good debate and lots of interesting views and important views for us here in Iceland. I also just wanted to stress, because I was coming from the statement of the Nordic Ombudsman of Children. The statement doesn't have, as I said in my talk, the statement doesn't have any suggestion of how this should be sort of taken forward. And in our comment to the Parliament, my office's comment, we emphasized that the penal code is not the way to do it. We discussed the Swedish way, and so we sort of open up that there are lots of ways if we want to regulate or whatever we want to do. So, and I think that what you have been saying here today is really helpful, I think, to take this matter forward. So I just wanted to say this, and I wanted to thank you. It would have been very nice also to have more debate on certain issues that were, but I know the time is up, so maybe we can just take that up outside, or but I really think that this was a debate that was needed and views that were needed in the debate here in Iceland. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now it's time to end this, and thank you everyone for coming and for your very interesting contribution. And at least speaking for myself, this has left me with a lot of things to think about. There are many aspects, and this is a very complicated issue that needs to be looked into very thoroughly. And thank you again, and have a nice time here in Iceland, those of you who came from other countries.
To ask all our speakers and our foreign guests to come here to the front. We go to take a picture of all of us. And I will also make one point. Do you realize what happens today? They are Jews from different obedience, who have probably also some between themselves sometimes communication the difficulties. We have Muslims from different obedience, sometimes who have also difficult to talk together. There are Christians from different churches, and communication is not always easy. But today, we are all together, and we realize that we have one goal. We are all brothers and sisters, and we want to be that. And we want also that Iceland be on the head of all countries in the world, let us say like that, for that it is possible to have inter-religious dialogue, and that it is possible to talk together with believers and non-believers and believers of many different religions, and that's the message of the Interfaith Forum here in Iceland.